Good evening, everyone. I would like to call the Committee of the Whole public meeting for February 6, 2024 to order. I would like to acknowledge that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for their stewardship of these lands. I would now like to ask if anyone has an interest to declare to please do so now. Looking around the room, I am seeing none. Just a friendly reminder, if there are any interests to declare, please submit them to board services following this meeting. I would now like to call for a mover to approve the agenda. Trustee Lyra, does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? All right, seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried. I would now like to move on to the briefing from the chair of the board. Chair Scott, can you please provide your briefing?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to begin my remarks by noting that for many families of students with developmental disabilities, the transition from high school can be challenging. The OCDSB's Learning Support Services team has been holding a series of information sessions to assist parents and caregivers with this planning. More information can be found on our website regarding virtual presentations on navigating the system, community day programs, and post-secondary education and employment. And in addition, they will be holding an in-person transition planning resource fair on the 27th of February at the Confederation Education Center, where participants will be able to meet a variety of service providers in the Ottawa region and learn about programs available for youth with an intellectual disability. And secondly, we would like to send our best wishes for health and prosperity to all of those families celebrating the Lunar New Year this weekend. Happy New Year.
All right, thank you, Chair Scott. Are there any questions from trustees at this time? All right, seeing none, I will move on to the briefing from the director.
Through you, Madam Chair, good evening, everyone. The Education Foundation of Ottawa's Toonie Tuesday campaign is taking place this month. Donations made to the campaigns directly supports the OCDSB students. In the past year, the Education Foundation of Ottawa has processed over 900 requests. A few quick examples of how they helped individual students include the EFO providing a grocery gift card to help a family struggling with school lunches, a newcomer family with 5 children receiving warm winter clothing, and finally, a student who was unable to attend school for an extended period due to illness. Family was looking for ways to engage them. The EFO provided a museum pass to support this student's ability to participate in a meaningful learning activity while off during their illness. These are just a few short examples that delivered a tremendous impact to school support students and their families. If you can, we encourage all members of our community to donate in support of the Toonie Tuesday campaign. Information can be found on the Education Foundation of Ottawa website. Report cards will be coming next week. Secondary report cards will be emailed on Monday, February 12th, and elementary report cards will be sent out on Wednesday, February 14th. I would like to again remind families that they have until Friday, February 9th to register for Middle French Immersion or apply for an elementary or secondary school transfer. Students or adult learners can register for the winter night school until February 15th. Finally, it's a sad reality that too many young people in Ontario have been victims of human trafficking and sexual exploitation. As a school board, we are committed to working alongside students, families, and community partners to help prevent, identify, and recognize human trafficking and support those affected. On February 28th, we will be holding a virtual speaker series session on combating human trafficking. The session aims to equip parents, guardians, and caregivers to identify warning signs and grooming behaviors and understand the factors that make children vulnerable and susceptible to trafficking. We will also explore ways to collectively support parents, guardians, and caregivers in safeguarding their children. More information will be shared in this week's updates. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director. Looking around the room to see if there are any questions. All right, I am seeing none, so we will move on to delegations. There are no delegations this evening, so we will now move on to matters for action. I will now call upon the Director to introduce Report 24-006, Facilities Renewal Program and School Conditioning Improvement for 2023 to 2024 Project Plan. Director?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn this over to Associate Director Giroir and his team for the work related to the project planning.
Through you, Chair. So the Facilities Renewal Program and School Condition Improvement Project Plan is an annual plan that we submit to the board. So I have the General Manager of Facilities here to present you the plan, but the purpose of tonight is to obtain approval of the plan so that we can continue on with these projects through the course of the rest of this year and through the summer.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Report 24-006 is seeking approval for the overall renewal budget plan, which is funded through the Facility Renewal Plan and School Condition Improvement dollars. You'll see that the report is fairly similar to reports found in the past, as the work undertaken annually is very similar. The report covers approximately $117 million over the next 2 years, which includes a carry forward of approximately $46 million of SCI funding, which is due to planned deferral or delayed projects. The last 10 years, the board has received roughly $450 million in SCI funding, completed approximately 1,800 projects varying size and complexity during that time. If we slide. So here's a breakdown of the project types and major project categories. So if we look at the 6 major categories, electrical is approximately 22%. Interior, which includes accessibilities, with 27%, mechanical about 21%, roofing 15%, site and paving 6%, windows 8%, and there is a small contingency. Next slide. So we're just highlighting a couple of the project categories that we work on annually. Here we see science lab refurbishment. So on an annual basis, we typically upgrade 1 to 2 science labs. They're very invasive projects that take typically a couple of years to complete, but the outcome is very significant to the school. Next slide, please. Learning Commons are another program that we've been undertaking over the last approximately 5 years. Typically, we do 1 to 2 Learning Commons, and we're really just upgrading the existing libraries into a modern 21st century learning environment. Next slide, please. Barrier-free unit washroom upgrades to meet the current OADA requirements. So we're looking at approximately 3 to 5 barrier-free washrooms annually, which provide dignified washroom facilities to students and staff with special needs. Next slide, please. Doors, windows, and masonry, self-explanatory, but typically we will break window phases into multiple years because of the invasive nature of the work. Significant work to undertake a full window replacement in a building annually. Next slide, please. Asphalt paving, so site rejuvenation. We look at upgrading 11 to 15 schools annually to upgrade parking lots, play yards, basketball courts, etc. Next slide, please. Mechanical upgrades includes boilers, domestic hot water tanks, rooftop units, air handlers, HVAC. There's been a lot of focus over the last couple of years in the HVAC, so this category is very important. These projects can be complex, and we have found over the last couple of years delivery times have been significant. So upfront planning on these projects is very important. Next slide, please. Roof replacements, again, self-explanatory. Typically undertake 10 to 15 roofs, which account for the budget of 10 to 15 million typically annually. In general, we do not undertake a full roof replacement annually. It depends on the condition, and so we're looking at section by section. Next slide, please. Electrical and lighting upgrades. So this area covers off typically the retrofit of existing fluorescent fixtures to new high efficient LED fixtures. And we've been focusing the last 5 years on a lot of infrastructure upgrades on the electrical side. Typically, this kind of work, we don't know if it needs to be done until it's catastrophic. So we looked at a preventive maintenance angle on this. So this would be a life cycle replacement. That's it.
All right, thank you, staff. It's always great to see all the hard work happening in our facilities. I have a speakers list started, and I am going to now call for a mover of the recommendation. So trustee Lyra, and then trustee Aziz, and then trustee Kaplan-Murphy. Trustee Lyra.
I'd be happy to move the recommendation, though I do have a couple of questions. So my first question is,
Before you ask your questions, can you please move the recommendation and read it out loud?
yes, I would like to move that the Facilities Renewal Program and School Condition Improvement Budget project in the amount of $117,821,303 be approved as detailed in Appendix B of Report 22-006. B, that staff be authorized to proceed with individual projects tendered within the Facilities Renewal Program and School Condition Improvement Project Plans. C, that the FRP and SCI projects are tendered, but based on bid results or as priorities change, additional projects may be added or removed to suit the availability of the overall budget, and these additional projects will be able to proceed without further approval as long as the total overall FRP/SCI budgets are not exceeded. And D, that the chair of the board and director of education are authorized to award contracts above $500,000 that are within this overall available uncommitted approved budget.
All right, thank you, trustee Lara. You may now proceed with your questions.
Great, thank you. So my first question is, the report talks a little bit about a 2 to 3% reduction in greenhouse gas annually. Is that expected to be additive or multiplicative over a number of years?
Through you, Chair, that would be additive.
Okay.
On an annual basis, we're looking at 2 to 3% reduction.
Okay. So my next question is that several gold standards, green standards exist in other sectors. Are we remotely close to getting any of our buildings certified or approved as green buildings according to any external standard? And if so, which ones and should we be?
Through you, Chair, that would be something we'd have to investigate as far as what the metrics are that we have to compare our buildings to. Because of the age and the vintage of our inventory, it's hard to apply all of our facilities as a blanket against some standard. We do apply some of the LEED-like principles to our building, but we don't necessarily apply for that certification because there's other different complications that come with that. The current building code and latest changes with SB 10 really do force us as owners and builders to meet a high standard for energy efficiency.
That is good to hear. On page 7, we talked about 15 new sites for photovoltaics. Are these new sites or these existing sites being retrofitted is the first part of the question. And then what percentage of electricity usage, either as a percentage of the total or as a percentage of the associated site, are we expecting to bring in through those photovoltaics?
Through you, Chair, the 15 sites would be new sites for photovoltaic systems. However, they could be new facilities. So right now, our focus is to retrofit where we can. However, we're finding that a lot of the existing structure cannot support a new system. So what we're doing is we're looking at putting those systems on new builds because we know the integrity of the structure can't handle it. And then so within the report, we've identified and allocated budget to those systems. However, there may be times that we cannot go ahead with those just as structural limitations. As far as what we're looking at for consumption, it depends site by site based on the size of the array. We can calculate that, but as far as they could all be different. So I can't answer that right now, but we could do an analysis on how much per kilowatt per square foot we're generating. So if you remember from last year, our systems are net metering, which means we're feeding back into our system. So we're offsetting our consumption.
Okay. Second last question. You talked about replacing roofs and windows and asphalt. What kind of value for dollar work is done to make sure that we're spending money on things that are going to last a long time and spending money on things that are worth building?
Through you, Chair. Can you clarify that question?
Sure. So if we had the choice between building a roof for $1 million that'll last 10 years or building a roof for $2 million that'll last 100 years, obviously it's a much better long-term deal for the district to build a roof that'll last 100, even if it's slightly higher. So the question is, how long are we looking? What projections are we making when it comes to trying to decide whether or not to build this or to build that?
Through you, Chair. So the projections are case by case depending on which part of the building we're looking at. But we typically look at investing a higher dollar value in the initial capital infrastructure to reduce our operating costs over the long term. So it's kind of a complicated question to answer because every different discipline is different. So we'll investigate what kind of roofing structure we're going to replace with in order to get the best investment over the long term with least amount of maintenance. Same as our mechanical equipment, we'll look at the highest efficiency, the highest upfront capital, reduce operating costs over the years, reduce energy efficiency. Same as windows. Historically, we had gone to a 2-pane window because the investment in the 3-pane was too expensive and the payback wasn't there. But now that's coming around, so we're looking at that. So we're constantly looking, and staff are constantly researching, and we're evolving our approach to our systems. So there are so many that happen that applying as one answer to the entire portfolio just unfortunately can't be done.
Okay. Last question, and then I've got some comments. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the 2022 audit report and how we're enacting those recommendations.
2022, through you, Chair, I'm not, Brand, are you aware of the?
So in the report that we got, it references an internal or an external audit that was done of our facilities. Oh, I'm gonna have to find the page and get back on the list because I don't have the page in front of me. I'll find you the page and we'll come back to it. So my last comment, I suppose, is I'm very happy to see both the commitment to accessibility and the OADA that was taken in this year's report, as well as the environmental considerations that were taken in this year's report. I love getting this report every year. It's got lots of fun information, and I'm really glad to see that my comments and feedback over the last number of years have been taken into consideration with regards to making sure that we come as close as we can to meeting our deadline of 2025, as well as our environmental obligations. Thank you so much. I'm happy to move this recommendation.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lara. And just to confirm, you want to come back on second time speaker list?
Yes,
Okay.
because I do want to answer that question.
All right, on my current speakers list, I have Trustee Aziz, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, and then Trustee Jenkins. So Trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. I also had that same question raised by Trustee Lyra, but I'll trust that she will find that page number as I scour through my notes for the same page number. I will first start by saying thank you to staff for getting this report to us. Equally excited to see all this exciting work, especially the highlighting around environmental concerns and upgrades that are happening in our schools. And it's a great way for us to lead and demonstrate by example for our students. I've got a couple questions and will do my best to be succinct. My first question on page 2, I'll let everyone flip in the report. I see a 46.48 million carry forward from the previous year. Did we not use those funds towards the SCI? If so, why not? And where did those funds go if we didn't carry them forward?
Through you, Chair, if you're referring to the 46,480,000, yeah, on an annual basis, we typically historically, we have been carrying forward approximately 40 to 45 million of school condition improvement funding. This is generally because in the year, I believe it was 2017-18, the ministry had doubled up on funding through SCI. So over and above the typical 45 to 50 million we received it twice. And so what that did is it pushed us to carry forward that same amount annually. And the reason we carry forward is because there is a limitation that we can do annually within our schools within that generally 2-week period. We do have resource limitations within the city. We're not the only owner who's looking to get significant amount of work done in a short period of time in the summer. So historically, we typically undertake 40 to 60 million, and that continues to push forward about 45 million of carry forward of SCI funding.
Thank you, Chair. Another follow-up on the following page, page 3 in table 1. Why is category D, so on the table, you scroll down, category D, we see services such as plumbing, HVAC, fire protection, and electrical listed as both restricted and unrestricted expenditures? Are there various ways we can apply these funds? Is it like a yes and?
Through you, Chair. Yeah. So when the ministry came out with the school condition improvement funding, there was restrictions. The intent of that funding was to handle major building infrastructure. So if you look at the division, 70% restricted. So the target for those dollars is 70% is that major infrastructure. So you're looking at plumbing, foundations, superstructures, and then the 30% can be spent on pretty much anything. So if you have a category that's within the restricted category, it's typically available within the unrestricted as well.
Sorry, I'm just making note of the answer. Thank you. I'm also glad to see in my own zone, the W.O. Mitchell Elementary School gym partition on the list of things, because that was something that was coming up, and it's always great to make the most of our spaces. Trustee Lyra, did you find the page number for the report? The audit, sorry.
Through you, Chair, I know the audit you're referring to. It's the accessibility audit we performed in 2022. Sorry, when you said audit, I thought it was a separate ministry audit. So we had a architectural firm undertake an accessibility audit of all our facilities within the district in order to provide guidance to allow us to plan properly. If you look at this year, I think we've applied $6.5 million to accessibility projects. That was an incredible amount of data that we collected under that audit, and we're currently using it as a guide to implement those plans. So it is something that we could potentially share, but really it's used as an internal tool to try to apply resources appropriately across the district.
Thank you for clarifying. To follow up once, so I understand that the audit is being used internally to address those accessibility concerns that were highlighted. Will we receive, because I've heard concerns from other trustees to make sure that our buildings are accessible, will we and can we receive an update from facilities once those changes have been made so that we can review where we are, where there's space for growth and what we've learned through the process?
Through your Chair, yeah, we're in the process of providing looking at a summary of all the accessibility work we've done within the last 5 years. Keep in mind the 2025 deadline as we outline the report. There is no exact requirements for the built environment. And that's because building code typically when it changes is not retroactive. In order for us to retroactively address every physical barrier within our buildings is almost physically impossible. So we do try to undertake as much as we can on a reactionary measure and proactive measure. But to change every piece of infrastructure within our facilities and meet the current building code and AOD requirements is simply not feasible.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I completely appreciate that. I think it'll just be helpful for us to revisit, where we have been, a leader in this space, opportunities for growth, and perhaps feedback as to, where students are still seeing and staff are still seeing concerns, and where the research has showed that there is room for growth in terms of improving the accessibility of our buildings. My last question is regarding the air quality pilot that I had requested that was mirroring what the Waterloo Region District School Board had done. Actually, they have just released their report on that work, which I found fascinating. And Chair, through you, if we don't get time to answer this question, I'd like to go back on the speaker's list.
Trustee Aziz, I don't believe there was a question there, so.
It was a follow-up to my question regarding the air quality pilot, if there was follow-up.
Through you, Chair, I thought we'd answered that question. I remember you bringing it up. I believe our systems are totally different. We have central systems that monitor CO2. I think if I'm referring to the right question that you had. So our systems operate differently than the Waterloo region. And So we can't pilot the same project. We do have CO2 monitoring in place in all of our schools right now. And so we do have a system in place to that does that.
Thank you, Chair. I'll go on the second time speakers list to follow up on that, but thank you, Associate Director Giroux.
All right, thank you, Trustee Aziz. Trustee Kaplan-März.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I will support this motion. I have some questions related to air quality standards. I'm glad to see that accessibility has been addressed for students with disabilities and gender neutral bathrooms addressed as well. Looking at the way that the breakdown of the improvements are laid out, we can see various different systems and exterior improvements that would relate to ventilation. But what I don't see is specifically whether that addresses improvements in air quality standards or whether it's simply, windows that need to be replaced because they're falling apart. So I guess my question is, and perhaps I missed this, but when our motion from September 12th, 2023, in which we were supposed to receive a report prior to the end of 2023 on ventilation related investments, challenges and opportunities. I'm wondering whether this kind of report would be able to overlap with that kind of report to tell us specifically which in which ways you're improving air quality standards. And I'm thinking both in terms of ensuring that we are supporting the safest learning environment for our students in terms of health and ventilation, but also thinking about extreme heat and climate change. It's not enough for us to just be trying to maintain our buildings, but we also have to be thinking about improvements with standard quality standard improvements. So my question is, how does this relate to changes in air quality standards? And also, did we receive the report to the Board of Directors on ventilation challenges and opportunities? Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-März. Before I hand it over to staff, I do believe we received the report, but they will be able to confirm.
Through you, Chair, yes, I do believe we provided the report. So as far as air quality standards, we had made significant strides and investments to air quality during the pandemic, and we maintain those standards. Following the pandemic, the ASHRAE had recommended a different methodology, which we are continuing to implement, and that's an infectious risk management mode. So what we've done is essentially gone back to standard ventilation practices within our buildings, and then if required, we can adjust and follow up and turn it into this mode, which typically adds additional HEPA ventilation in our buildings. As far as standards go, we follow the recommendations outlined by the building code and ASHRAE, but we continue to upgrade equipment, which is also part of the life cycle of that equipment. I would say as a whole, we are leaders in the province as far as our HVAC system goes and how we operate them. So we, as I mentioned, with the other categories of building infrastructure, we continue to review and educate staff and continue to review and understand the latest changes, the latest best methods that we can implement in our buildings and to ensure that we're providing the best environment for the kids. So our systems are constantly evolving and we're constantly following the recommendations from those governing bodies who kind of define how we should be operating our facilities.
Thank you. That's helpful. But I was wondering actually whether perhaps in future, like maybe for next year's report, we could have a section in which you would specifically outline the ways in which we are addressing air quality standards, not just to say the description of replacing windows, but perhaps to have a section that would outline that, if that's possible.
Through you, Chair. Yes, this is possible. We can identify any changes or modifications we've made to our approaches and strategies for ventilation and how the renewal plan does apply to that. That's not a problem.
And the second part of that was in terms of climate change and extreme heat, because the standards, it's not just in terms of having HEPA filters and improved ventilation, but it's also whether or not our buildings are designed to deal with if we have another spring that is, smog and extreme heat.
Through you, Chair. So smog would fall within our ventilation air quality, so that's certainly work that we've done. Extreme heat is certainly something that we are seeing more of. And the recommendations for air conditioning, additional air conditioning in buildings is something we're seeing very frequently as a request. We did commit, I believe, last year to provide at least one space within our facilities that does have air conditioning. Some of our buildings to retrofit with an entire air conditioning system is just simply not feasible. We've undertaken some of those projects through the years, and just the invasive nature and the disruption to staff and students over the year is just not worth the investment. So what we've committed to and we're currently working on, it's going to be a multi-year plan. It's to try to at least air condition gymnasiums. And so that plan, those projects would fall within this renewal plan. And so what we can do is have a review of where we sit with that program and share it.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, just so you know, in memo 23-00077 shared on December 5th, you'll be able to find all the information as well for the report.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. Moving on, Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, and I appreciate the discussion on accessibility. It's important that our students and staff are able to physically able to enter our buildings and be able to participate with their colleagues and other students. A number of our schools, including the high school I went to, is several decades old, and things like the roof. What sort of monitoring do we do to determine which roofs need to be replaced?
Through you, Chair, we have a pretty elaborate roof preventative maintenance program as well as a roof assessment program. So we have third-party consultants who analyze our roofs and identify by section the condition. Based on those assessments, and that's across the entire district, we do come up with our renewal plan and roof replacement plan based on that analysis. It's hard to quantify, but in the last year with rainfall we've had very few leaks. So it's proof that our investment in those programs and a preventive maintenance program and our renewal programs is working well.
Thank you. One last question. In the news recently, there was one school in our in OCDSB that needs their play structure, 2 play structures in the school area need to be replaced. So there's certainly on your Appendix B, you note various sites where play structure replacement and the landscaping, et cetera, but it just says various sites. Are you able to sort of elaborate more? And there's a broad number, like a round number that's associated with that. Are you able to elaborate on that?
Through you, Chair, yeah, I don't have the exact sites that we're working on this year, but I believe there was a backlog that we had through the pandemic. So I think it's 10 or 12 sites that we're looking at. So we can certainly identify those. Yes, the play structures have become a very challenging area, as we did historically look at parent communities to fundraise for those projects. But what we found following the pandemic, that the cost of installation and construction of these has increased greatly. So those fundraising dollars aren't going nearly as far. So what we're looking at is a review internally to see how we want to fund those programs and fund our play structures across the district. So beyond that's in its infancy of those discussions, but we're looking at potentially changing the model in which we fund and we approach play structures.
Thank you. That's it.
All right, thank you, Trustee Jenkins. Moving on for our first-time speakers list, Chair Scott.
First of all, thank you very much for the report. I like the amount of detail. It hits a nice point, and I especially appreciated the photographs that were included in the slides because sometimes it's helpful to be able to visualize what is actually needing to be done and being done. In terms of the science lab replacements, I really appreciate seeing that we're getting some refreshing of science labs at West Carleton Secondary. However, do we actually have a priorities list for science lab replacements for the whole district? And could that be shared in some form with trustees?
Through your chair, yes, we have that list. I'll have to have staff update it. It was last looked at probably 6 or 7 years ago, but I can put that together.
I think that would be helpful because in previous years, we have had some understanding so that when people start to raise concerns about the labs, at least we can say, you know, this one is on the horizon. We may not know when it's going to happen, but knowing that we are paying attention is important to a lot of students and their families. Second question relates to the play structures thing. We have funds here for play areas and development. We do initial play structures for schools when they open. Any other part of a school facility is something that we would replace or repair, but we don't do that for play structures. And given that play structures are so expensive, is there any way that we could reconsider some of that policy and perhaps make it a little bit easier to have play structures, or alternatively do some research into alternatives to play structures? Because we do support outdoor classroom creation, and there are a lot of other standalone playground structures that are not necessarily play structures that students really, really like to use. So what are we doing in terms of long-term planning?
All right, thank you, Chair Scott. Before we go to staff, I'm going to hand it to Director.
Through you, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Chair Scott does raise an interesting point around the value add of a play structure as compared to other possible equipment or approaches to outdoor activity, especially considering not only the cost as our manager has indicated, but quite frankly, the fact that many of those play structures are out of commission for half of the school year at times in the winter months. There are a series of research papers that our district has conducted in the past just to explore and environmentally scan really other options that are available at a much lesser cost. It's not to discourage play structures per se, but to, as the chair has mentioned, open up other opportunities for school communities to consider. So that's something that staff can definitely return to and bring forward to the Board of Trustees, a perspective on, at least for awareness, other options. I've seen a number of very interesting recent developments in this area, and I'm going to get this title very wrong, but the Gaga Pit, for instance, which is a wooden structure at a much smaller cost, very safe, that students play a series of ball games within it. I can't begin to explain how it functions, but I can see their engagement in those types of structures. That's just one example that I've seen on my visits at a much, much lower cost than a traditional play structure. But I will turn it over to staff for further comment. I appreciate the point raised here at the extraordinary expense of some of these pieces of equipment as traditional play structures. So we'll turn it over to staff.
Through you, Chair. So this has definitely been a hot topic of discussion for the past couple of weeks based on some of the media attention that the one site received. So we are committed to looking at what we can do within the funding that we do receive. So there is a little bit of ambiguity between what we can and can't fund. So we need to clarify that piece. And then the other thing is we need to do a little bit more of a wholesome study on the best way forward for the district and coming up with a common model amongst schools. And so we are committed to exploring that work over the course of the next year. But in the interim, we have dedicated some funds to keep the model that we currently have moving forward while we investigate the best way forward, so we make a proper and informed decision. So we have added to the amount of funding that we have dedicated to that in the past, and we will definitely work with the schools that have demonstrate the greatest need. And so I think we have a way forward, short term and medium term right now, and that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you for that. And the last thing I'd like to note is how pleased I am to see the focus on reducing our energy costs, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, and continuing to work on energy efficiency in the modifications that are being done. We've been doing this now for more than a quarter of a century, and I'm glad to see it still in full swing because there's still a long way to go.
All right, thank you, Chair Scott. Moving on to my second time speakers list, I have Trustee Lyra and then Trustee Aziz. Trustee Lyra?
So I found the page. It was the last paragraph of bullet 8, but my answer has been gotten through someone else's question. Thank you. So I have no further questions at this time, but you said there was someone else, so I'll do wrap up after. Okay.
Trustee Aziz?
I'm so sorry. I was snacking. So just to clarify, I apologize to Associate Director Giroir. I was citing a previous comment, but didn't clarify because I ran out of time. Sorry. So I had asked previously regarding a pilot air quality measure. The Waterloo Region District School Board had a motion last May apologies, Associate Director Giroir, you had also answered the question regarding that, our systems are set up slightly different to theirs, in which their pilot project involved installing CO2 sensors in 3 schools, 20 classrooms for about 3 months. And they were able to then conduct about 6 service work orders during their pilot, which included repairs, replacements, et cetera, to improve the air quality in the classrooms and schools in which those CO2 sensors were placed. My question was if we could cost a similar pilot for perhaps the new school year, because we're in February already, as the Waterloo Region District School Board was able to look at this pilot and see the benefits and costs and challenges of looking at regular air quality measurements and ways to improve and report on repairs, changes, and make sure that parents are aware of any concerns or such related to air quality.
Through you, Chair. Trustee Aziz, I think you noted that there was work orders generated from their pilot program.
Yes, sir.
So we do have CO2 monitoring throughout the district, but the CO2 monitoring is intended as a proxy measure to ensure the equipment is operating properly. An elevated CO2 level that does not necessarily mean a increased transmission risk, we'll say. So we do use that as a overall measurement tool to determine if equipment is operating properly. If you have a system that's, say, feeding 6 classrooms that breaks down, you're going to see an overall increase in CO2 levels on the return of that system if it's not ventilating properly. So we would have to discuss further what we'd want the pilot to look like and what kind of metrics and data we'd look to get out of it, just to understand how we can implement existing infrastructure that may already be there.
Thank you. If I could follow up on this after the fact for further discussion. I don't think this is something we can get kickstarted this school year, but I think it warrants further discussion, especially given the smog pollution combination that we've seen in the warmer months, as well as concerns regarding flu season. But thank you again for answering my question, and we'll follow up for further conversation after the fact. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Trustee Aziz. Looking around the room, I am seeing no other hands. So Trustee Lyra, wrap up.
Thanks. I'm going to encourage all of my colleagues to support this motion. We are committing a significant portion of our budget to the renewal of our facilities. And I just wanted to once again express my disappointment that we end up with a now $896 million backlog of capital repairs, because our kids deserve the best and we should be sending them to the best schools. And we have almost $1 billion in buildings falling apart. So thank you. Support it.
All right, thank you, trustee Lyra. I will now call for a vote on the recommendation. Can we have the recommendation on the screen, please? Terrific. All right, so I will now call for the vote for the recommendation on the screen. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 8.2, I now call upon the director to introduce report 24-023 school year calendar.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll turn this particular item over to our Associate Director Reynolds, who oversaw the school year calendar development for the upcoming school year.
Great, thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, you have before you the annual report bringing forward the staff recommended school year calendar for the 2024-2025 school year. Recently, we received the ministry template and memorandum with a proposed school year calendar. We've largely held to that. We have some discretion through Regulation 304 to establish what our school year calendar would look like, keeping in mind that we have to have a minimum of 194 instructional days, 3 ministry priority days, and up to 4 additional professional activity days, which we have. We're also permitted to have up to 10 days examination days. Working in accordance with our procedure and our stakeholders, which include representatives of different bargaining units, secondary students, parents, administrators, both looking at a K-12 perspective and then also elementary and secondary specific. We have the recommended calendar before you. The professional activity days are distributed in such a way to maximize and be deliberate about when certain learning is to occur, but also to allow a smooth startup and operation of the school year. They're also strategically placed throughout the year in order to provide, based on student feedback and some parent feedback, disruptions or breaks for students at key times in the year so that, the work does not, the tempo and pace of the school year does not become overwhelming. We also consulted with our equity team to do our best to predict when all the key dates of observance would be throughout that school year and try to ensure that none of our professional activity days landed on those. So we have a fairly traditional looking school year calendar being presented with a start date on Tuesday, September 3rd, following Labor Day for both elementary and secondary schools, a final day on Friday, June 27th in 2025. And then you have the PA days, holiday breaks placed throughout. We did speak with our coterminous boards, particularly the OCDSB, and we are in alignment in terms of stop, start, and placement of winter holiday and March break. And we did try to achieve some alignment where possible around PA days in order to maximize efficiencies with transportation and to minimize disruption for the community. And I think we're going to have some alignment there, but not necessarily 100%. So we are hoping that the board will accept the recommended school year calendar, and that'll allow us to begin our, and assuming it goes forward at board, begin communication with our communities as well as meet our ministry deadline for submission of March 1. Thanks.
All right, thank you. I am now going to look for, I have a speakers list and I'm going to look for a mover of the recommendation. So my speakers list is trustee Blackburn, trustee Lara, and then trustee Aziz. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam.
Apologies.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I'd like to move the recommendation, please.
All right, thank you. Would you like introduction?
None required, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. Moving along my speakers list, I will have trustee Lyra, then trustee Aziz.
Thank you. So in years previous, we front-loaded professional education days into the first week of September. That wasn't recommended again this year. Can you elaborate on why we decided not to front-load professional education days?
Through you, Madam Chair, one of the drivers in the last couple of school year calendars for doing so was a requirement to really begin with instructional days and PA days do count towards those prior to the Labor Day weekend. So we were able to use PA days so that families still had until after the Labor Day weekend to anticipate the start of school for students. In addition to that, one of the reasons we did talk about it in our committee is that when the year starts with PA days, there are some advantages, but there are some operational disadvantages. It is challenging for school staff, particularly administration and office staff, to fully participate and lead those PA days while they're still trying to accomplish the start of tasks and student registrations that go right up until the first day of school. So the two things combined to a recommendation that we get the school year up and running. We have students in class. We deal with any reorganizations or staffing changes that need to happen, allowing then for the first real full PA day with the staff, as it will be more or less for the rest of the year on the 27th of September.
Okay. My second question is that we didn't include the schedule for non-semestered secondary schools. Do they take exam breaks in the exact same time period? And if not, can we get their calendar associated with this report in future years?
Sure, thank you. And I'd meant to mention that in my oral introduction. So they do not do 2 5-day splits. They do 1 10-day session in June. So it really just begins 5 days prior to the semester 2 examinations in the 19th to the 25th of June. They do begin 5 instructional days prior to that. But we will include that certainly in our communication and our posted calendar, and we can include it in reports going forward.
Those are all my questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, trustee Lara. Moving down my speakers list, trustee Aziz.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'll echo my support for this recommendation. I just have 3 brief questions regarding the report. Can you confirm that this calendar doesn't overlap with any religious holidays? And if there is overlap in terms of PA days or exam days, that staff are provided, or educators rather, are provided with the appropriate material to accommodate those students or reschedule exams as needed?
Thank you. And through you, Madam Chair, we did consult with our equity team. And as far as those dates are identified in advance, we're able to determine that the PA days are not falling on any of our star dates of significance. Those are the dates that we recognize are often of the greatest importance to different communities and groups of observance. However, if that is not the case, or an examination does fall on a key date of observance, as always, we will work with the individual staff member or students involved to come up with an appropriate accommodation.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, just 2 more questions. I've received some emails from parents regarding the solar eclipse that's supposed to take place, and we've heard from other school boards that they have made a decision on moving PA days and such. I want to just confirm that parents will hear soon from our school board regarding a decision on how the board will handle this.
Trustee Aziz, because that is not related to the school year calendar that is in front of us, that is not a relevant question to the calendar.
Okay. I just meant because there were PA days, but I will skip that one. My last question is, why have we recommended 2 PA days in November for elementary students instead of having one in November and the other in October? Just some concerns for parents if we have 2 days off in 1 month and the impact for those parents.
Thank you. So the total number of PA days that we have here is the same as this year and previous year. So the total number of days are not altered. The November 29th PA day, which you have at, in fact, the November 8th PA day elementary is a provincial priorities day. We do try to load the provincial priority days a little earlier in the school year, but still give a reasonable amount of time between them. So we have one in September. We have the long weekend for Thanksgiving in October, and then we have this one falling on November 8th. So the spacing is, somewhat consistent between those dates. The November 29th is a district priority day that's tied to parent educator interviews. That is something we're required to provide, and that is the typical time and the appropriate time to hold those. So it just happened to fall out that way that we would have 2 in November. I'm focusing mostly at the elementary level where childcare is of greater concern.
Thank you, Chair. Those are all my questions.
All right, thank you. Moving down my speakers list, student trustee Hung.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I just have a question regarding the examination periods for next year. We've heard a lot from students in light of recent challenges with the weather that a lot of the non-uniformity of kind of the adaptations to the weather has caused a lot of mental health struggles and kind of a feeling of lack of support from the district. So I was wondering if there was any consideration made of how weather could affect kind of the the dates that we have for exams, and whether it's maybe it could be considered to increase the flexibility of those dates in some way. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. So in typical years in our semestered schools, we have the 5 and 5 split. Exams are usually scheduled. Exams and other summative assessments are scheduled over the first 4 days of those 5 days, and the 5th day is reserved largely for some additional student success opportunities. But it also does provide that flexibility if required. We were challenged as a group to try to remember a previous time where we had 2 interruptions to transportation in an examination period. We seem to recall that there may have been one, but we couldn't concretely remember when that was. And I've been with secondary schools since '96. The point I'm trying to make is that it is rare. It is a rare occurrence that we had 2 days with interruptions that did result in us having to double up assessments on one day, which I know caused some worry to students who had not had that experience before. But we worked with principals who in turn worked with their staff to ensure that some flexibility and reassurance was given. And if that it looked like any undue harm or whatnot, or loss of learning might have been incurred by the student, that there would be a conversation between the teacher involved and the administration to come up with some kind of a solution. And after the fact, again, although it did cause some worry heading into it, we have not heard much to suggest that did not happen where it was needed. Going forward, we are going to have conversations with our principals and in turn, I think, with our teachers around some small changes we can put in place to ensure that we have greater flexibility and adaptability should we encounter such a circumstance, likely in the winter. But as we all know, we've seen some kind of extreme weather in May and June and other months as well. So that the need for flexibility is definitely there. At this point, we're still recommending having final assessment or examination days in the calendar. And so we'll keep working with staff to ensure that there's greater ease of adaptability. But again, it's been a fairly rare occurrence, and we're hopeful, as we are every year, that that adaptability may not be required.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on my speakers list, Chair Scott.
Thank you, and thank you for the calendar. Most of my questions have been answered, but I did have one other, and that is the question of the 5 days at the end of each semester for exams. Given that the whole approach to assessment and measuring student achievement and levels is changing, has changed a great deal over the last 20 years or so, and is continuing to change as we understand more about how learning works and what forms good testing. Are we stuck with having 5 exam days at the end of each semester? Because that means that the students who are not writing exams in many cases are losing 5 instructional days where they could in fact be at school and learning. And although I appreciate that staff have put things in place for student success support and so on, that doesn't really address all of the students' needs. There are still students who are basically at home, as their parents tell me, doing nothing for 5 days. So is there any plan to put something in place for the students who are not writing exams so that they don't in fact have 5 days off?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. There's a couple of things there. Certainly we did a lot of work with our school administration and by extension, our teaching and other staff this year, led by our program learning and innovation department to try to clarify expectations that every student, regardless of grade, should have not just one, but multiple opportunities to come into the school and demonstrate learning or improvement in learning. It's true in some of those cases, those are optional, and some students may have opted not to take advantage of those. So we're going to continue to re-examine the question, is this still where we want to go? and what further direction or supports can be provided to ensure that no one is home for 5 days doing nothing. That is not the intention. And I certainly hope if that did in fact happen, that it happened in the minority and not for the majority. A lot of work was done to try to encourage schools to make sure folks came in. The bigger question that I think was being asked is, what are these still relevant? These examination days, given all the changes that have happened in terms of pedagogy, teaching and learning, and proper assessment. And that's a conversation that I think is happening across the province. Unlike other key assessments, something that is missing, fundamentally missing, typically where students demonstrate learning, they have an opportunity to receive a lot of feedback on that. And with the way the examinations are structured, that can be difficult. And we worry about a lost teaching opportunity that's happening there. That being said, we don't think we're at a point yet where our community, they still value examination days. Our teachers are still taking advantage of them. We're not at a point yet where we want to recommend that we don't have them, but it's certainly a conversation that I think is going to happen across the sector and within the district. But short term, we'll try to make sure all students, regardless of grade, have opportunities to come in and either learn or demonstrate learning.
Thank you for that. I want to be very clear. I'm not saying there shouldn't be exams. I do think exams are part of the assessment process. But I'm not sure that all exams should be on fixed days at fixed times necessarily. I look at students doing driver's tests, for example. They don't go because it's the last day of February or the last day of June. They go because they feel they are ready to take the test. And do they always pass? No, they don't. But they go because they feel ready. And so it seems to me that we need to do more to assess students at points where they feel ready for those formal assessments. And we also need to consider whether, if we don't have to do them all as a block of 5, maybe what we should do is space them out over the last 10 days of the semester and have instructional days in between. I don't know what the right answer is, but I hope the conversation is ongoing among our educators. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may just quickly comment, certainly we do not have to have an examination day to have an examination day either. Our regular instructional days would provide that flexibility too. So there are a lot of options that we will continue to consider. Thank you.
All right, moving down my first time speakers list, Trustee Jenkins, and then I'll go to second time.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an interesting discussion on examinations. Is it not our responsibility once students graduate and attend first year university or college, if we're not preparing them in terms of examinations for their first year of post-secondary? I think there's some concern. Examinations in university or college are assigned weeks. If the student misses it, then unless there's some sort of, exemption made or arrangement made with the professor or the school, perhaps that can be adjusted. But if we're not preparing them for first year post-secondary, I think we're going to see a lot of students really struggle in their first years.
Thank you. And, it is an interesting conversation, and I'm wondering if it's another item and not specifically just a school year calendar one. But to that, I do think, and as a parent of students in university, what we understand preparedness for university or college or the workplace to be may be different than what the reality is today. That's at least my observation as I ask questions about what they've done today. Examinations are rarely part of that experience.
All right, thank you, Associate Director. Second time speakers list, Trustee Lara.
I was going to have comments very similar to Trustee Jenkins about how it is our responsibility as a public school board to prepare people for either post-secondary education or the world of work. And it's much harder to try and get, despite the pedagogical evidence that we have, other institutions on board with a less strict adherence to interpretations of examination. And the world of work has even fewer qualms with relation to just missing deadlines or declining to write things on short notice. So I think that we do have to remember that we are preparing people for the world at large. And I think Trustee Jenkins was right on the money. So thanks.
All All right, thank you, trustee Lara. I am seeing no other hands, so I will send it back to trustee Blackburn for a wrap up.
None required, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you. I would now like to call for a vote for the recommendation. Can I please have the recommendation on the screen? Trustee Blackburn? All right, now that the recommendation is on the screen, all those in favor? And that carries. Thank you, everyone. Moving on to item 9, report from statutory and other committees. Item 9.1, I now call for a mover to receive the report from the Parent Involvement Committee dated October 11th, 2023. Trustee Nash, are there any errors or omissions to the report? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 9.2, I now call for a mover to receive the report from the Parent Involvement Committee dated November 22nd, 2023. I now call for a mover to receive. Trustee Aziz, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. I will now move on to item 9.3, Indigenous Education Council. I will now call for a mover to receive the report of the Indigenous Education Council dated December 14th, 2023. Chair Scott, are there any errors or omissions to the report? Seeing none, I will now call the vote to receive the report. All those in favor? And that carries. All right, moving on to item 10, matters for discussion. I will now call upon the director to introduce report 24-014, student learning update. Director.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I'll call on Executive Officer Giroux and Superintendent Laverne from Program and Learning Innovation and staff to address this report. Just as a bit of context for the Board of Trustees, this is the second part of 3 in the reports related to student learning. Our first one provided in the fall of 2023 around learning outcomes in core academic skills. This report addresses preparation of students for future success, and I'll turn over to Executive Officer Giroux and the team.
Good evening. Thank you.
Sorry, before we pass it over to staff, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, is your hand up for the report that is about to be presented, or did you have a comment about the meeting minutes?
No, it's the report that's about to be presented.
All right,
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure. Apologies. Take it away, Executive Officer.
Thank you very much. Delighted to be here this evening with this highly talented group of educators and researchers. As the director indicated, this is the second report in a 3-part series. And trustees will recall that last year we made a commitment to take what was a very large student achievement report and break it down into some more manageable pieces so that we could have richer discussions. This evening's report reflects our progress to date in student learning and looking at student learning overall and looking at how we're dealing with achievement gaps. Excuse me, and makes an important connection to the board's strategic priorities of centering student voice in learning and ensuring that there are learning experiences and credit choice for students. Also, the board's commitment to improving pathway options for students and engaging students in personally meaningful and student-driven learning experiences. And I think this report strikes a good balance of giving you that overview of achievement, but also talking about the breadth of program pathways and some of the work that's happened in recent years in terms of expanding those opportunities and creating really rich learning environments for students. So without anything else from me, I will hand it over, I think, to Superintendent, nope, to Andrea, General Manager Rahim, to introduce the next piece.
Thank you and good evening. Through you, Chair, I want to start by acknowledging the research, evaluation, and analytics team. In particular, 2 members of the team who are unable to be here with us this evening, but did a massive amount of analysis in order to bring this report forward this evening. So Kathleen Jubin-Vale and Vitanshal Vitanshal. And I refer to these learning reports a little bit like an iceberg, because the amount of analysis and merging of data sets that needs to happen in order to get those consolidated tables that we're able to attach as an appendix is enormous. So I want to acknowledge their great work. As mentioned, you'll recall that this is the second report in a three-part series. In November, we brought a student learning update that was focused on literacy and mathematics. In that report, we shared EQAO achievement, perceptual data, and report card data that allowed for disaggregation by identity so that we could have focused conversations around the areas where we've made strides and where we know that we still need work. And during that conversation, we heard a lot about the need for transparency. We heard a lot about the importance of not talking about the data and the work in silos, but in integrating them and talking about how we're using that data to make evidence-informed decisions across the district. So we've taken that feedback into careful consideration as we were preparing the report to share with you this evening. So just as was the case with our last update, tonight's report is focused on district level data. That said, I can't stress enough how important the role is for this data at the school level and the work that we've been doing with principals. And I want to acknowledge the challenging work that our principals have been doing, working with our data support leads, really unpacking and exploring their school level data and using that to inform their school learning plans. And we'll hear more about that from Dr. Laverne in a little bit as we talk about using those school learning plans to really be rooted in evidence, monitoring students and moving their work forward. And in doing that, we're working toward a data equity framework, and that's thinking about how we engage in data projects with equity as a focus from start to finish. And the board will have the opportunity to engage in some professional development in that area later this month. So for the purpose of this report, we've used a number of different data sets for the analysis. This includes our school climate survey data, program and course enrollment information, as well as achievement data, looking at report cards, credit accumulation, and graduation rates. And as much as possible, we looked to use our identity data from our last census so we can disaggregate to better understand where gaps exist and make sure that we're supporting our underserved students. So we're going to start by looking at the school climate data. In our 2022 school climate survey, students in grades 7 to 12 were asked how much they agree or disagree with the statement, "I feel my school experience is preparing me well for post-secondary education." Only about half of our students agreed with this statement. When we disaggregate based on our identity data, we see that agreement tends to be lower for students who identify as Indigenous, Black, Southeast Asian, Latino, Latina, or Latinx, gender diverse, and having a disability. We see that younger students had slightly more favorable responses compared to their older peers, but across the grades, we know that there's work to do in this area and helping students feel more prepared. And we have adjusted this question for future surveys that we're not just looking at post-secondary, but looking at students' preparedness for the next step in their learning, recognizing whatever pathway that may be. So actioning the results of this survey, we know that we must be starting with student voice. We need to be listening to our students and better understanding their learning experiences, which is outlined in the appendix and which you'll get to hear a little bit more about tonight, not just from staff, but from the voices of students as well. In the report, we share some information on elementary program enrollment, and program quality and accessibility were identified as priorities in the board's strategic plan. So with this in mind, we are looking at patterns of enrollment and at differences in identity. Overall, elementary enrollment has increased in recent years with a slight shift in distribution. English with core French enrollment is increasing, while early French immersion enrollment is slightly decreasing. That said, more than half of our students continue to be enrolled in early French immersion. Report card data by program shows that students in French immersion programs were more likely to meet the standard as compared to their peers in English with core French. Most of our data by identity shows that our students of identified groups do continue to be disproportionately represented in the English program, but progress is being made in reducing those disproportionalities, most notably for students living in low-income neighborhoods and for students reporting self-identified gender. When we take a look at secondary, we looked closely at grade 9 and 10 compulsory course enrollment with the implementation of de-streaming to be monitoring as that work moves forward. On the top of page 5 in the letter of transmittal, you'll see the OCDSB's timeline for the implementation of de-streaming. And on the graph shown on this slide, you'll see how de-streaming has moved students into courses that keep an academic pathway open for them longer. And this has reduced disproportionalities in academic level courses by increasing the representation of students in most of our identified groups for where we have population data in our system. So that includes students living in low-income neighborhoods, students reporting self-identified gender, students who identify as Indigenous, and students with special education needs. Given the initial focus on grade 9 with the rollout of de-streaming, we used that as our focus for looking at achievement data in this area. And again, we disaggregated the data by identity. And although this shows that the overall trends in terms of students achieving the credit and passing the course is promising, with more students achieving those academic credits, when we do the disaggregation, it does show that progress in reducing those disproportionalities in achievement is mixed. So we know that we can use this data to really help us refine our approach to de-streaming and to strengthen the learning environments to respond to those identified disproportionalities, which again, Dr. Laverne is going to talk a bit more about shortly. When we start to look at credit accumulation and graduation rates, we know that students who earn 16 or more credits by the end of grade 10 are deemed to be on track to graduate with their peers. At the OCDSB, 82% of students met this criterion in 2022 to 2023, an increase of 1% from the year prior. In addition to that, the OCDSB also tracks students who have or have not earned 8 or more credits by the end of grade 9 in order to facilitate early interventions to catch them before they get to that grade 10 mark. And last year, 88% of students in grade 9 were deemed to be on track at this point. Graduation rates are calculated as the percentage of students who receive an Ontario secondary school diploma within 5 years of starting grade 9. Now, we have the data that's reported by the Ministry of Education, and we have the data that we calculate centrally based on our own internal numbers. And those will give you different statistics because the ministry's methodology for calculating graduation rates isn't fully transparent. So we're unable to replicate it because they also have the ability to track students who enter and exit our board where we're unable to do so. So we do have 2 different data sets that we use for different purposes. The ministry data is really valuable in terms of giving us comparisons to the province and to other boards. So when we look at the ministry calculations and the 5-year graduation rates, we see that OCDSB students who began grade 9 in 2017-18 have a graduation rate of 91%, which is 2% higher than students province-wide, which was 89%. When we look at our internal data set, which I mentioned does look slightly different, it lets us explore the data for the different schools, which is why we've reported it here, because that's when we start working with school principals, looking at their graduation rates, and when we start looking at students who graduated in 4 years and 5 years. And we see that the vast majority of students did graduate within 4 years. When we start to look at the disaggregation of data, we can see that the disaggregation shows that for multilingual learners, students living in low-income neighborhoods and students reporting self-identified gender, as well as students who identify as Indigenous and with special education needs, are overrepresented among those deemed to be not on track to graduate according to the credit accumulation numbers that I shared previously. So to support all students through to graduation, student voice and experiential learning have become key parts of our strategy as we move this work forward. And on that note, I'm going to pass it over to the Program and Learning Innovation team to talk more about some of those opportunities for students.
Good evening, everyone. We're really excited to be with you tonight and share a number of examples of the different type of learning experiences that we're supporting for our students across the district. I am joined this evening with system principals Coleman and Massey, who are part of the Program and Learning Innovation Department and absolutely pivotal in terms of moving this work forward and leading this across the district. I'm going to describe a couple of our programs, and we do have a couple of videos to share with you as well for you to hear directly from students and staff regarding some of their experiences and the impact for them. So the Pathways and Preparedness for Future Success pillar prompts us to look beyond traditional learning approaches and our own school experiences, expanding our thinking and understanding of what learning can look like and how learning can be demonstrated. We know that traditional forms of learning work for some. We also know that historical practices can be limiting or harmful for some. By focusing on pathways and preparedness for future success, we can realize our hopes for a more equitable education experience by increasing access to opportunities, diversifying learning experiences, recognizing different expressions of learning, and situating student voice as the driver of their learning experiences. The learning choices selected by students and families are their first choice and need to be celebrated as such as we focus on building knowledge and skills and connecting students to their hopes and dreams. In the report, you will have noted examples and descriptions of different pathway-focused programs that we offer. Some of those examples are ministry programs. However, the majority are either ministry programs that we have enhanced and reimagined to better meet the needs of students in the OCDSB, and others are homegrown innovations developed in the OCDSB. I note that because I think it's essential to highlight the desire of staff in the district to go beyond simply implementing ministry programs to hear what our students need and seek, and develop learning experiences that meet those needs and wishes. Our work seeks to cultivate learning experiences that support students in connecting their life with their learning and their pathway goals. On this slide is a graphic representing the continuum of engagement with student voice. Student voice is often misunderstood and seen as a low-level performative activity of hearing students' ideas and providing, to be honest, limited choices. That is one understanding of student voice. Our understanding is more expansive. Work with student voice in the OCDSB goes far beyond that. Laura Lundy's research provides a continuum that, as you can see on the slide before you, guides engagement with student voice from starting with voice, which is hearing thoughts and ideas, hopes. So as a school principal, I would hear voice on a regular basis when I was in the halls. Moving to space, where we're creating intentional space for students to express their voice. You can see that when clubs are established and time is established for students to get together and have discussions. Audience is when we start to see things start to move. People in positions of authority are intentionally listening to student voice. So when I was a principal in a school, an example of that would be my setting up in meetings with students to hear their experiences and give them an opportunity to share the directions that they were heading in and what they would like to see. And finally, and this is where the transformation happens, influence. Student voice intentionally influencing their learning experience, and it moves from learning that is something they're experiencing to something that they are driving and building together. We want to share some examples of learning experiences driven by student voice through a pathways and experiential focus. We're working to create learning experiences that are more personally meaningful, helping students see and explore future possibilities they may not have considered. Ultimately, we're trying to help them see the genius that they have within and the expansive opportunities available to them. We're going to watch two videos shortly. On the first video clip shows students from kindergarten to grade 8 at Blossom Park Public School. Their staff collaborated with our experiential learning lead to support students in exploring an area of interest. The students chose their topic, researched it, determined how they wanted to present their learning, and were open to discussing it further. This learning was captured and embedded as part of their formal learning and grades. And I have to say, I went to Blossom the day that they were showcasing this, and I was blown away talking to students from kindergarten to grade 8, how passionate they were about their learning and how deep their learning had gone and how articulate they were in sharing their learning experiences. Mike, could you play the first video for us, please?
I'm in grade 6 and I did my project about baking. I'm in 7th grade and my project is about ballet.
I am in grade 8 and my project was about musicals. I am also in grade 8 and I did my project on Pokemon. I'm in grade 8. I did my project about World War II and aviation.
I'm grade 3 and my project is about asthma too. I'm in grade 1 and I love to run. I'm in grade 3 and I did my project about koala bears.
This project encompassed many students from diverse classes, ranging from grades 1 to 8, both the English regular program and the Middle French immersion program. And basically, students had a choice to pick a passion or an interest of their choice that they wanted to teach other students about and their teachers to know about them. So it was really about sharing part of who they were, and that lends to part of their identity and who they are. So it was interest-based. Students had the choice the whole way through. The project started at the end of September and went all the way until the middle of December. And throughout the project, teachers were encouraging students and offering much of the choice throughout how they were going to present, whether that was with a Bristol board, whether it was with a trifold board, or whether it was going to be digitally formatted.
I just came to see my daughter's class and some other classes, her friends. She's a 6th grader, and it was beautiful for their ages. They were very brave and talented, and it was really, really nice.
This was a great project for people who maybe don't every day get to showcase their writing talents or their math talents in the classroom setting the way it's set up. So to have a hands-on project like this, to bring in your own passion, there were a few students in particularly who really kind of honed in on their passion. Their focus was very specific to what they were doing. They weren't getting up, they weren't moving around, they were just focused right in on their presentation, on their project, asking for more time, asking to, look into things that they might not normally be interested in, but because this was their passion, they were able to kind of dive right in and really explore, and they're the experts on this, so they really had a good time with it, and I think felt a lot of success that they might not feel in the everyday class setting. I was not sure how it was going to go, but I'm very happy and surprised at the time and effort and the engagement all students in my class had, and they really, really enjoyed it.
In the end results, their creativity on the poster boards. We don't do a lot of creative activities like that unless it's an art class or drama. So this was all encompassed in language and the homeroom classes. So it ended up working out really well for so many students.
It seemed to be a really great event that many community members and stakeholders were able to attend, and that was really great. And for parents and for other students to tour around and to really capture and learn something new about their peers in the building.
So now we're going to jump over to Dunning-Foubert. In the next video, we're going to see students who voiced a strong desire to connect their community with their learning. They identified that food security was a privilege not afforded to all, and the variability between families and communities did not feel equitable or fair. Students questioned how they could be part of the change, and staff facilitated the openness for their learning. The Food Sustainability Initiative had its core within the science curriculum, but the students experienced learning as a whole that crossed over grades, subject areas, and expectations, providing growth that was beyond the original scope designed by the educators. Students drove the need, the experience, and ultimately evolved the outcome through the power of their voice. Mike, can you play the next video? Thanks.
This is a grade 7 and 8 experiential learning project that Dunning-Foubert took on as a group, yet differentiated for each class according to what students wanted to learn. This project was really about how we could feed our community and people in our community, and more environmentally friendly way, with plants and having healthy and fresh vegetables right outside of our doors, and just to really learn about how not everything goes as planned, with the plants,
because we had a lot of things backfire in our face and not go exactly how we wanted it to. They have done things from vermiculture to creating compost to building garden beds to planting to overcoming their failures from the plants that didn't grow and learning what they need to change and do differently. And I think building that resiliency piece within the project and having them apply it to other areas in their life was a really good learning opportunity that I didn't even know would be part of this project.
I hope every student had a new experience and that they made a lot of connections to the real world, learned practical skills.
I think the student voice and the student agency in this project has been wonderful. You can see it today when the students' chests are puffed out and they're proud of what they've done and they're able to tell us. They've made websites, they've made graphs on the growth of their plants. It is incredible the different avenues this project has taken.
The biggest thing I learned, planting is definitely not as easy as it sounds. You need to care for the plant a lot more than you think.
You have to try multiple times before you're going to reach your goals. It took us a lot of tries to grow these cucumbers. It's not about a project. It's not about a test at the end of the unit. This isn't just a science thing. The kids didn't even know what subject this project was for because it's cross-curricular, it's across the board. It immerses everything, not just a project. What I really like about the experiential learning piece is not only the hands-on and the student voice, is that it's multi-year. This isn't 1 year and done. So our hope is that this continues to grow throughout the school.
I personally will be continuing this in my classroom. It was so amazing to have things growing, to have the students be independent in their own projects and having just things that are alive and changing around us. It had such a calming effect in the classroom. It was amazing.
Thanks, Mike. So in this next slide, we're going to spin to some examples from high school. You can see some descriptions and evidence of the impact from student learning that was facilitated through an OCDSB created learning framework. As you saw in the report, the Authentic Student Learning Experience, or ASLE, is an OCDSB created learning framework that launches learning from the student's personal and pathway interests, situating them as the drivers of their learning. The teacher facilitates ongoing learning discussions, prompting student thinking and further exploration. Through ongoing discussions and sharing, the teacher captures evidence of learning and connects that evidence to curriculum expectations, resulting in students earning credits through content and contexts that are personally meaningful and motivating. Many students use this as an opportunity to explore potential pathway goals. This is being used in all of our secondary schools through their Student Success Program. Gloucester High School and Ridgemont High School have developed specific culturally relevant and identity-based programming using this framework. It also serves as the foundational approach through our school within a college program. As we've been working with those discrete programs, we started having discussions about the possibility of this being embedded within mainstream classrooms as well. We did a lot of thinking and discussing, and we did ultimately find that this was being piloted at a class at Corinne Wilson Secondary School. So we'd like to play a quick video clip of a student talking about their experience using this thinking and framework in their mainstream math class. Mike, can you play the next video?
I decided to start analytics, and it all started after the senior boys had their first game. They're the basketball team. And Mr. McDougall, my teacher, he explained how the game went. And although they won by a big difference, we decided to start looking at how they're actually doing in the game. I'm a numbers person. I like logic. So I was like, oh, maybe I can start doing that. So I talked to a basketball coach, and she organized analytics papers, and I started practicing by watching normal basketball games and like keeping track of the players. We have another data management class. Since we're doing a lot of stats, that class is kind of like keep tracks of data and statistics. So we want to kind of, by taking this class, we want to give the students an option to apply those that math into analytics.
What I find amazing watching the students and when we're at schools talking to the students through these experiences, how their eyes light up and how excited they are to share their learning and how incredible they are at explaining the connections in their learning. I'm blown away by that each time. So on this next slide, I'm going to speak to another program support that we offer called Pathways to Possibilities. We shorten it to P2P. We've been working closely with 8 of our secondary schools to diversify our approach to learning such that the whole student serves as the driver for their learning. Again here, working to connect life, learning, and pathway. Here are some examples of the impact of using a student voice and student-driven learning approach with students at OTSS. An Inuk student who became the first student in the province of Ontario to earn an Inuktitut language credit, who is also now attending our school within a university program and is poised to pursue a post-secondary education at university. A student who graduated last year was the recipient of the District Leadership Award for his contributions both within the school and through programs at Inuktitut. He's now working for Inuktitut as he works towards his goal of apprenticeship in welding. 18 students have had the opportunity to connect their authentic lives to curriculum expectations and credits within the comforts and connections of the Lodge, finding space and choice in their learning and journeys. As another example, last year Bell High School worked on creating a tool that would help teachers collaborate and share evidence of learning to be used in assessment in all of the students' courses. An example of this, teachers were using a tool to capture the shared evidence of 10 students who were in ESL programming. This allowed the teachers to support each other in assessing the learning and progression for each student. The teachers would document evidence of learning from different classes, and teachers, because it was a collaborative document, would go in and be able to connect those demonstrations of learning to curricular expectations. So just because it wasn't demonstrated in that class at that moment didn't mean it didn't count. It was allowed to be brought in, and that allowed the students to move along a much more successful journey. In this specific examples, the 10 students were not passing any of their courses at midterm. By the end of the year, they passed all of their courses. So that's 10 students earning 40 credits in total. And this was all because the teachers decided to look at capturing learning in a different way. As we continue exploring more diverse pathway-based learning experiences with students, one area of growth is building capacity and confidence in considering different ways of engaging with and recognizing student learning. Our system is well established in learning specific ways and having students demonstrate that learning in certain ways. Through a focus on pathways and preparedness for future success, we are working together with students and parents to expand what learning can look like and how students can demonstrate their learning. This work reflects the ongoing diversification of our students' experiences, learning, values, and goals. This final short video clip is from a student who completed her high school diploma using the ASLE framework at her home school. It summarizes the goal and impact of this work far better than I can. Mike, can you play that video for us?
I'm graduating, which I didn't see happening when I was going through the hardest times of my life. I was like, there's no way I'm making it. There's no way. Like, I can't do this alone. Like, no way. So once I graduate, I'm gonna go back and try to stay home with my daughter for a bit longer once she's old enough to be watched. Put her in daycare and finally start my life, get a job, make new friends, possibly go to college because that is something I'm interested in. I want to be a vet technician. Also, I just love working with kids. So I know that with all the things I've learned, like, that is a huge possibility now, because now I feel so much more confident after the courses and curriculums that were given to me that I feel like I could do it. So honestly, who knows what's next, but I know that it's good.
We hope that these examples and the descriptions provided in the report have helped connect the achievement data described by Dr. Rahim with the application of a pathway, experiential, and student-driven lens within student learning experiences. However, we are just beginning our work on this particular journey. Our analysis of the impact of some of this work has highlighted our need to be even more intentional in diversifying student learning experience and ensuring that students, especially those for whom traditional approaches are limiting, ineffective, or harmful, are given the opportunity to drive their learning through the lens of their interests and pathway goals, to experience different approaches to learning, and to become more aware of options that they hadn't considered before or had disregarded based on their experiences to date. Based on the results of a survey asking students if they feel prepared for post-secondary, it is clear that we need to talk more with students to better understand where their learning is meaningful and where it is not. We need to understand better who engages in the different pathway-based programs and listen to them and understand why they are involved in these programs. We also need to talk with students who are not participating in those programs and find out why. We need to better understand student learning experiences in our school and learn from them, where they see connections and where they disconnect, so that we can work with them to co-create learning that builds meaningful connections between their life, learning, and pathway goals. Our work to de-stream grade 9 and 10 courses over the past several years has sought to improve access to more pathways for all students, and we are achieving that goal, but there is more work to be done. Our student achievement data shows that more doors are open for many more students than was the case even 3 years ago. Yet the disproportionality in this data tells us that the current learning approaches are insufficient as some students continue to be underserved. This learning need is prioritized in our approach to school improvement planning. As I described to you back in December, schools are identifying those for whom current approaches are insufficient and collaborating with colleagues and central supports to develop new approaches. To that end, we are working cross-departmentally to increase diversified, identity-based, culturally relevant approaches realized in learning practices and continue expanding learning experiences. To better understand connections and disconnections in learning and to help us further support students' belief in the connection between their learning and pathway goals, we are going directly to the students. We're going to listen to them to better understand their experiences, wishes, and needs. We want to listen to students who we are underserving within our current approach and programming to continue our work in removing the barriers to student success. Listening to, working with, and co-building learning experiences with students rather than for students has already proven effective and will continue to improve and build great meaning in student learning experiences for all of our students, especially with those currently underserved by the system. We are seeing early evidence of the success of these approaches as noted on the data shared in the report. We've taken initial steps and must continue to work to support and grow student achievement and well-being for all of our students. We truly believe that our continued efforts in this area will make a difference in the life of the students in the OCDSB. Thank you, and we're open for a discussion now.
All right, thank you, everyone. It's very inspiring to see what our students are doing across the district. I do have a speakers list started, so I have Trustee Kaplan-Murth, Trustee Aziz, and then Trustee Lyra. Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you very much, and thank you both for the report and all the work that you've put into it in your presentations, and thank you for providing the disaggregated data that we've been asking for. So I have a couple of points and questions about each component. For the update on student learning, I am concerned that we are still seeing significant disparities in terms of who is in the English stream versus who is in French immersion, and looking at the data and seeing that there are still very clear racial and socioeconomic differences. Students with special needs are also disproportionately represented in the English program. I'm wondering what has actually changed, because the data that's presented to us doesn't tell us what has really truly improved. I understand that there are more students who are registering now in English, but that doesn't actually explain the disparity, because we also have more newcomers to Ottawa. And so I think that what we, I guess the question is, what are we doing about these disparities? What are we doing about the students in French immersion who are more likely to meet standards in all 3 subjects, which is an indicator of disparities in the programs? What are we doing to address that? And I think it has to maybe be at a higher level. It's not just identifying those students who are already streamed into English or streamed into French, but looking at how do those families get encouraged to sign up for English programs, and also looking at the attrition rate, because I think if you look at elementary and then over the years of the elementary French immersion, you see a high attrition rate for boys still leaving because of perhaps behavioral issues or other pedagogical reasons, but they're leaving the French immersion and ending up in English. And for sure, students with disabilities and special needs. So what are we doing about that disparity? What has actually improved? Those are two questions about that. And then for the second part on the school improvement plans, thank you, Dr. Laverne, for that presentation. I think the videos and everything are inspiring, but they're still dealing with helping to support students who have already been maybe disadvantaged earlier on, like right at the very beginning, right from the moment at which they were shuttled into English versus shuttled in French immersion. And it doesn't, I guess, looking at pathways to improve their outcome is great. But I want to know at a higher level, what are we doing to address those disparities so that that's it.
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murphy. And if you would like to go on the speakers list after staff answer, you can again. Go ahead.
I will do my best to respond to those. There was a lot in there, and there's a lot of really important pieces for us to consider. Certainly in the areas, when you noted right at the beginning, English and French immersion still remain significant areas for streaming. We agree. Our focus in the last couple of years has been on the grade 9, 10, heading to 11 for de-streaming. We have on our list now, how are we looking at the K-8? Because we recognize that access to that program can be the earliest way that streaming can happen. Some of what we have done, and we have a lot of work to do, and we have quite a journey on this one, but some of the work that we have done is working with our principals in terms of building capacity to have conversations with families that gives them all of the information. So we're not directing families to what program is needed, but making sure they're aware of the different pieces, different programs that are available for their choice. One challenge we have in that area is that not all of our programs are available in all of our schools. So if a family lives near a school where that's easier for them to access, and we hear this from families, that can be the reason they chose one program over another. And we do certainly hear that feedback an awful lot. In terms of the question around disparity and how we're doing that whole district, and I've made a note about the programs as well, because we have that conversation on a regular basis. That actually was a driver for our approach with our school improvement planning process this year. We have asked principals to focus in on the students in greatest need, and identify the learning plan based on the students in greatest need so that we can improve their achievement. And our goal with that is to close the gap that is there by focusing directly on the students that are experiencing the greatest struggles and hoping to move those forwards. That we continue working with principals on a monthly basis. Superintendents of instructions met individually with each of their principals in the last week to review their plans. And have conversations so that there's greater understanding there, but which students are in need of support. That information then comes back to us centrally so that we can bring it back to the various departments centrally to develop the learning that principals need to lead this work in the school. So we are very much focused on that. And that is part of that's a partial answer to what do we do as opposed to waiting until students are struggling for these additional programs. And that is a conversation we have on a rather significant basis. We have been able to very much diversify these programs. What we're finding through our discussions with schools is that because of the work that we're having with these programs, schools are now starting to respond more proactively to student needs so that we're not waiting until a student is very much struggling as soon as we see the initial needs. That's one of the reasons, as Dr. Rahim shared, that we look at the grade 9 credit accumulation data. And as much as here we shared 8 credits by the end of grade 9, we also look for 4 credits by the end of first semester in grade 9 In fact, we look at which students are either not passing or in the 50% range at the midterm point, and then we're going directly to school to try to intervene earlier. We're also noticing greater capacity in the system to start to embed more diversified learning. So you saw that example at Korean. We're having more teachers reach out to us to talk about how can they do that in their classrooms as well. We also are working very closely with families. We do this, we start this through the Family Reception Center of identifying aspects of their experiences that are learning that may not have been captured in formal learning, especially for students who arrive in Canada with no formal documentation. So if they're heading into high school, historically they would head in with 0 credits. We have a student success teacher at the FRC, the Family Reception Center now, who talks with the families, and the assessors are doing this now, capturing their different experiences up to this point. And granting equivalency credits. That has resulted in more of our schools and through our guidance departments reaching out to learn more about the PLAR, so the Prior Learning Assessment and Recognition Program. That I remembered that is quite incredible. The acronym can flow easily, the words not so much. To make sure that we are recognizing their experiences and supporting them along the way. But you have flagged a really important piece that we need to continue focusing on, which is we need to continue diversifying what learning looks like so that it is more representative of student values, beliefs, histories, identities, and so that it is more meaningful so that we, in an ideal world, we work ourselves out of needing the other intervention programs after the fact. I hope that answered the questions.
All right, thank you very much. Going down the speakers list, I have trustee Aziz, then trustee Lyra, then trustee Nash, then I have Lily Miller, and then I have Seema Lama. So trustee Aziz, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I will say, I think both teams here know I'm a big fan. Appreciate the report, and I could yammer on forever, but I'm excited to hear feedback from others here with us today. I'll start by saying I did appreciate the brief videos. I think hearing from our students, especially the last video when the student mentioned or said, quote, "Who knows what's next, but I know that it's going to be good," unquote. I was like, am I going to cry? But that was something that really amplified the work that you're doing, providing so many students this hope that might not have had it before. Yeah, the face you're making, yeah, that's the face I'm making. So, and I also really agree with Dr. Laverne's comment about engaging more with students on those gaps. Where can we do better? Where have small things made big changes for our students? So I'll try and keep my 3 questions to 3 questions. My first is about the de-streaming. There was discussion about remaining gaps where we have begun, those de-streaming initiatives to break down barriers and open up pathways for students who might not have otherwise had those offered to them. And I'm wondering what remaining gaps we're seeing right now. I know we're early on in the de-streaming process, both at the OCDSB and provincially, but in a nutshell, if you can, provide, what more can we do to improve and open up the pathways for our students through de-streaming?
Assistant Principal Massey has led that work in our district for the last couple of years, so I think I'll turn the mic over to you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the question and certainly the support. We have work to do, absolutely, because we have students that we are not serving well enough. When I think about de-streaming, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this, talking to communities, talking to parents, talking to students, and it's about choice and who makes the choice. And traditionally, systems have made choices for families. This program would be a good program for you. And a fundamental change for us as an organization, as a learning organization, is changing that driver. Asking students and families what are their hopes and dreams, and asking ourselves how we get that student there, not putting up barriers to say, no, that's not realistic. And so when I think about de-streaming and I think about those gaps, it's the infrastructure around that. It's the instructional practice. It's the access within in the curriculum and within the resources. And so, when I think about the incredible work that our staff are doing in schools, really redefining their practice, thinking about what accessibility in classrooms actually looks like. I think that's hugely important. And as Dr. Laverne said, it is about student voice. It is about trying to understand the lived experience of students in the class and then differentiating for all the learning styles in the class. That doesn't mean 30 different learning plans for 30 students. It means when we are creating learning opportunities or assessment opportunities, where critically analyzing where are the assessment or the entry points for students. And it's not limiting to, well, you can do this, a poster board, or you can do this, you can do this, you can do this. It's here's our goal, here's the learning objective. Let's have a conversation about how you best learn. And we can do this kindergarten to grade 12, how you best learn and how you can demonstrate to us, to the teachers, to the support staff, that you have learned along the way, that we can access your demonstration of learning. And so it's really thinking about that mindset there and then putting infrastructure in place. The last thing I will also say is last time we came in December, we talked about literacy and numeracy, and the power of the curriculum that we have now as a continuum is incredible. Grades 1 through grade 9, there is a continuation in the math curriculum and in the language curriculum. So we are working with staff and with our federation and union partners to design professional development around what that continuum looks like. I gave an example last time about a concept in grade 2 that a student needed in grade 11 math. And that teacher recognizing that continuum was able to get that student back on track. So it's recognizing those different approaches. And again, I'll just close. It's about better understanding where the system is not allowing choice for students.
Thank you for that fulsome response. 2 remaining questions. What can we do to better prepare our students to leave the OCDSB nest? Thinking to the first couple slides about perceptions and feeling prepared. And I think too, when I get emails from parents and students alike, and even, alumni of the OCDSB, alumnus, sorry, that's the, yeah, about, feeling prepared and being, and having the experience of feeling that they were prepared for post-secondary education, but nothing else. And I'm wondering if there's comment or feedback. And I have one question after that remaining. Thank you.
I'll jump in on that one. We want to go directly to students, and we have actually in the past couple of years began speaking to students once they have graduated from us and have been in a post-secondary for a couple of months or a year, trying to capture what their experience has been so that we can get a better understanding of how they felt prepared based on their experiences with us and where they saw those gaps. We've just done preliminary, I will call them toe dips into the water on that. However, we've had a number of discussions where that is going into full force as we head forward through this next semester. We need to talk to the students. As adults, we can take our best guess, but it may have been a year or two since I was the age that they were. And it's a very different learning experience and a very different world that they're working in. So we're intentionally not leaping to making our best guess and wanting to go to them. That was sparked very much from that data where students indicated really about 50% feel that they're not. So we need to hear from them, why is that? And we're going to bring that information back to take a look then at what can we do. Often in my experience, when we ask the kids, what do you think we should do? They have great ideas that we can implement quite easily. So that is the strategy we're going to take with that piece right now.
That's very exciting to hear, and I hope we hear back more about that, because that is something we hear, or I hear when I'm out and about. Such exciting ideas from folks much younger than me who have entered the world of work or entered college with these ideas on small things that we can do to make a difference. So thank you for that, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. My last question is a data question, because of course it is. On page 3 of the report, we see, as mentioned, 82% of students were deemed on track, noting the earning 16 credits or more. And you did show some of the trend for students who were, deemed on track. Do we know what the historic year-over-year trend is for that? What the 10-year and 5-year trend is on that, and what we think has improved or decreased that feeling of preparation?
So we do have historical data. I don't have it at my fingertips, but we do have it in the department that we could share. Of course, there are definitely some blips around the pandemic in terms of looking at what the data looks like there. But even when we look at this data, we can see that it is pretty consistent. And to the best of my recollection, it's pretty consistent historically as well. Keeping in mind that we are looking at the data district-wide, where we get really meaningful information is when we do start working with school principals and looking at their school level results and how they are smaller numbers and can have greater fluctuations, but where there is real power of the principal there in terms of guiding that work and getting students feeling prepared for the future.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thank you, Trustee Aziz. Trustee Lara?
I was going to say it's almost 9 o'clock. Do we want to take the 9 o'clock break before I get started?
All right, I would like everyone to please be back by 9:08. I will be calling the meeting back to order. We will take a break. Thank you. room and online and folks getting back to their seats. So we will continue on with the questions. Trustee Lara.
Thanks. So I'm going to preface this with starting by saying that I consider any data since January 2020 to be very suspect. But my recollection is that the 2017, 2018 and the 2018, 2019 data had our district at the low 90s in terms of graduation rate. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the decrease that we've seen in graduation rate over the last number of years as either as it relates to the pandemic or as it relates to other changing factors in society.
So I think the graduation, and this is why the distinction between the graduation rate calculated by the ministry and the graduation rate that we calculate based on our internal data, I think is such an important distinction. So I think what you're recalling is the one reported through the ministry. And when we look at that, it is comparable. So it's just because we use a separate data set, which is where we're getting the 88% from, where we can't track students who enter an EdStar system so that we can look at students who graduated in 4 years versus 5 years, because it's meaningful for us to better understand what their timeline looks like. And when we then want to map that onto their credit accumulation leading up to graduation, and in particular, when we want to work with school principals and identifying their students, unfortunately, we're not able to do that with the ministry data because they don't share their formulas with us. So when we use the ministry data, we do see it still at that same rate. So I don't think that decrease is reflected. It's when we switch data sets.
Okay. Can you elaborate on any other impacts we've seen since January 2020 on either educational outcomes or on graduation? Any sort of metrics that we use? Are people taking longer to graduate? Have we seen an increase in people going from 4 to 5 years or 4 to 6 years? Have we seen any other impacts since 2020?
We are seeing the vast majority of our graduates graduating within that 4-year time period. It's like 99% are graduating within 4 years. As far as the impacts, it's impossible for us to tease out what's pandemic related, what's de-streaming related. So when we're looking at different impacts in terms of what the cause and effect is, I would say that one of the things that we have definitely had the opportunity to refine and improve during the course of the pandemic was those experiential learning opportunities and students earning credits by being at home and rebuilding a trailer with their dad and then creating a how-to guide on that and being able to get course credit for it and seeing those kinds of things evolve. So I think the way in which we look at and talk about learning tonight looks so different than it did 5 years ago. So the impact on those metrics is really in those kinds of innovative programmings and the enrollment in those and the credits attained through those. As far as the impact on our standard existing measures like credit accumulation and graduation rates, again, those are things that at the district level still tend to be fairly stable, which tends to be the case with such large numbers. But as my colleagues and I were chatting about on the break, to go back as well to Trustee Aziz's question around credit accumulation and thinking that although it's relatively stable, one of the things that we know is that those credits tend to now be academic level credits that keep those pathways open for kids. And so those credits looking different from the kinds of credits that students were earning prior to that, and thinking about what that looks like, not just at the district and school level, but for an individual student, the impact that those credits have is absolutely life-changing. And so really looking at how we use that data.
I guess one of the reasons I went down this line of questioning is that I'm concerned that we're seeing all this effort put in to make sure that all of these students are succeeding in areas that they wouldn't have otherwise, but we're not seeing that reflected in the data. We're still seeing about the same percentage of students graduate. And I'm wondering if all this extra effort we're putting in isn't changing our graduation rates, why we're putting in all this extra effort.
Well, I think first and foremost, we're putting in this extra effort to better meet student learning needs, right? And I think over the last few years, we've seen a shift in where our focus is and whose needs we're meeting. And so it's difficult for us in this overview to speak to that very specifically, but I think it's a really important piece. And when we get into, and somebody asked a question earlier about programming, and when we get into more detailed program quality and accessibility conversations as part of the board's strategic plan, we'll get a little bit around where the board's focus was in designing programs, our current programs, where we were years ago in that model versus where we've been in the last 5 years. And really it's around serving a different set of student needs, right? And making that your priority. So that may take some time to see in terms of graduation rates. Because you're right, we're not that far out of pandemic and other influences. The challenge is always isolating any particular thing. But hopefully we're better meeting the needs of a cross-section of students based on the effort.
Yeah. One of the things that I see in a lot of emails and I hear from a lot of parents about is making sure that we are, and I'm going to paraphrase many emails, making sure that we are raising the floor and not lowering the bar when it comes to graduation, making sure that all of the students who succeed in graduating have done so because they've been provided additional supports and able to succeed, and not because we have lowered the bar and made it so more students can clear it without any additional work. And so I'm wondering if we have any intention to collect, because I'm almost certain we don't collect it now, any intention to collect first-year success rates at university or graduation rates out of college, or how long somebody stays at their first job coming out of the OCDSB, so that we can say we are successfully preparing people for the next stage of their life, as opposed to once they leave our doors, at whenever they leave our doors, they're no longer a problem, eyes are closed. Do we have any intention to collect that data? Do we have any idea how we might collect that data? Has any thought been given to collecting? Are we preparing people for society level data?
So at present, we don't have any plans to do post-secondary follow-up. I think definitely an area that would be interesting to look at. But when we look at resources and the breadth of the research project, that would be certainly exceeds our current level of resourcing. And not to say that there aren't other ways that we come to understand student success or find student success ways. The other thing I think that's really important to follow up on the earlier part of your question was the comment that Andrea made with respect to the quality of the credits. So while it appears that it may be the same level of graduation, in fact, we have more students earning academic credits. That's a significant change and something that we should not undervalue in this conversation.
That was, again, predicated on the fact that the credits have raised the floor and not lowered the bar on what is an academic credit.
I think you have to meet the academic curriculum requirements, and there are differences in those curricular requirements. So I think that threshold is established by the curriculum, but I defer to the educators on that.
I would agree. There is a standard that all educators are monitoring for, and our reporting would reflect those pieces. I think what we are seeing is a more diversified approach to earning those credits and what that learning can look like out of what would have been when I was in school. And that is part of our work, is being able to identify and value different ways of doing things. Our system has taught us all that it counts when we write it on a piece of paper, and it counts when it's on a test that is scheduled at a certain time. But we know through our learning, through our different learnings about different cultures, identities, peoples, that there are many different ways, and capturing that is just as, and in many cases for the individual, more important. So we do maintain that standard. We're just diversifying how we get there.
Okay. I had some questions about what we are doing to ensure that people who are traditionally marginalized, who are traditionally less successful, are able to succeed in traditional pathways. So I appreciate that a lot of work has gone into making sure that we can try and meet people in other areas. Like was mentioned by Trustee Jenkins earlier, in a little bit of a almost tangent, there are still institutions in society, universities, colleges, that are going to hold people to a standard that might not meet the same pedagogical threshold that we set for ourselves. What are we doing to ensure that people from various identity backgrounds or various marginalized groups, those who come from poverty, are able to succeed in areas and in ways that are going to, I see the time, I'll be one sentence, that we're still going to be able to succeed in ways that are
Trustee Lara, I am going to ask that you go back on second time speakers list, and I will give staff a chance to respond if they wish to do so.
So I think the pathways piece is a really important piece that we need to consider in answering that question, because what the student needs to do depends on where they want to go and what they do with it. So every student, well, most students take almost all the same courses. There are some electives, but there are many that are the same for students. There are many compulsory courses that all students must take. What they're learning is like in that course can be tailored for where they want to go with that learning, and for their strengths and their needs. So rather than taking a one size fits all, we are working, and we have done this for a number of years. When we shifted a number of years ago in course selection as a good example, from being marks-based, that's what it was for a very long time. You needed this mark to sign up for the next course, to what is it you want to do as you leave high school? Now, how do we help you get there? And how can we help you be successful in that experience? So our work is more on personalizing that to help them get to where they want their pathway to be. So what I'm aiming for when I'm in school and what Assistant Principal Massey is aiming for can be different, so that how we showcase our learning can be tailored for the student as well. So they are still achieving the standards, they're still meeting the expectations, they're simply demonstrating it in ways that are more personally meaningful for them and connected to the pathway that they choose to go to.
All right, thank you. Trustee Lara, to confirm, do you want to go? All right, perfect. Moving along, Trustee Nash.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Chair, I think the most important thing we do as a district is to help those students that are struggling. And certainly I was very impressed and encouraged by your report this evening, because that's a big focus. So thank you. One thing that Trustee Aziz did mention this, but I'll bring it back because it was really striking. The fact that on from elementary to secondary students, roughly 50% did not feel that we were preparing them. And am I putting too much emphasis on that? Especially when you look at the graduation rates, which, by all, not preparing them yet, the graduations rates are very high. Do we know why they feel that way?
No, and it was a very important piece of information when we saw it as well. It was one of the first pieces of information that we had some conversations about, and that's why we want to go to the students and have some conversations. We don't know who answered which way. So we're already looking at establishing a series of mini student forums so that we can speak with them and try to get a better understanding of what it is that they're looking for, how they feel we are supporting, how they feel that their learning experiences with us in the OCDSB is supporting them, and where they're seeing those gaps, so that we can respond to that in very different ways. And we have conduits to do some of that right now. We, for the last 3 years, have ran a 1 or 2 day event. It depends. It's always online, that we call Launch, and then we add the year to it. So Launch 2023, 2024, et cetera. And it's an opportunity for students to explore a huge number of pathway options: university, college, employment. We had an anchor from the Weather Channel one year. That's a job. Of course, that's a job. I had never thought that it was a job, but it is. And the students got to learn about that, and we're giving them more opportunities to discover what's out there. I think something that we need to make sure is that what we're doing is helping them connect to what's out there and where they want to go. And we need to talk to them for that to happen.
Before you go on, Trustee Nash, the director also has a few comments.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Just one point to add to what Superintendent Laverne has shared. I do think when I look at this data, there is an impact that the pandemic period and the discontinuation of learning had. There's no question to my mind, my interaction with students, and it isn't hard data, but there's no question in my experience as a director, there were a number of students who in their final year of secondary school came back. What would have been their final year came back because they felt the experience they had in particular years tied to the pandemic were influenced to such an extent that they wanted to be better prepared before they went on their post-secondary pursuits. And when I look at that data and those percentages, and I think of students in grades 7 and 8, students in grade 9 to 12, a number of them would have experienced the full impact of the disruption of the pandemic period and the preparation element. I think students are very aware of their learning environment, their learning styles. I think that would have influenced that data versus that kind of data over a trend with another group of students that didn't experience that lengthy period. And I just put that on the table because there's no question in my conversation with students, the secondary level in particular, but even in elementary, they were well aware of what was going on during that period of time once they got to a certain grade. Certainly, I mean, the younger students, maybe not quite so much, but there's no question that the disruption to learning that happened for a lengthy period of times would have, to my mind, had an influence on those types of prompts around preparedness.
I think you're quite correct. So thank you for that piece. I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving down my speakers list, Lily Miller.
Hi. So I'm still interested in the first of all, very appreciative of this data. It's very helpful for us to know how Indigenous students are still falling so far behind. And there's not much change since 5 years ago. You know, every year when these students don't graduate, like it's very impactful on their whole future. So seeing this here now 5 years later, I'm wondering with this new plan, the pathways, how quickly do you think we can see a difference in this data? Am I going to be here 5 years from now and see the same thing? Thank you.
It's an excellent question, and I don't think that we can simply project a timeline, but I can tell you that at the senior staff table today in our conversations about achievement and learning and some of the deep work that we're doing, we did talk about this particular issue and the need for us to dig a little bit deeper to better understand that. And the Indigenous education team acknowledges that need. And so the next step for us is sort of figuring out what the right steps are to better understand and undertake that analysis.
All right, thank you, everyone. Seema?
Yes, thank you for this report and with the disaggregated data. It's much appreciated. Some of the questions have been already asked around especially for the equity groups, the marginalized students, the sort of unpreparedness that they feel for after graduation. And then again, the rates don't seem to have changed for the grade 9 and 10 credits that we see for these groups. Particularly, I was struck by the students with disabilities. But I heard that you were going to try to do focus groups. What would be really interesting to see is the voices of these students, the students from these marginalized communities, to say how what you're doing and what's been described today is working. Because the statistics aren't telling us that. So it would be interesting to see, in fact, some of it's going the other way. So it would be interesting to see and hear these marginalized students as to how these techniques are actually working for them. I think that would be good to see that. And as well, I'd like to hear what exactly are you doing to get to these particular students these marginalized students in digging deeper. Thanks.
So I think I have two pieces on that. Absolutely. The students that you're speaking of are students that we are prioritizing, reaching out to and having a conversation with. In terms of how are we, I'm reframing this, but changing the learning and the achievement for students that are currently most underserved in our district. Our work, that is what is driving our work with our SIPSA, and you can see that in our BIPSA as well. But as I've shared earlier, our schools, all of our principals have been asked to identify which students are experiencing the greatest struggles, who has been underserved, and set their learning goals around that. And then we are providing principals with learning support to target those direct needs. As I said before, superintendents of instruction met with each of their principals last week to review that, to make sure that the focus is on the most underserved in the school. And then we are working on building our monthly learning sessions to support principals in changing that reality and changing those experiences as well. The other piece that we have engaged in the last couple of years is, at the secondary level specifically, is really taking a look at what course offerings are available to students and making sure that their voice is driving that. Student voice has always driven secondary scheduling and what courses are offered when they select their courses. But we've taken a step back and asked students, we've been piloting this in a couple of schools, to let us know before we get to course offerings, are we offering the courses that you're interested in? Are we offering the courses that you wish to engage in? That would support your achievement of your pathway goal. That has been really quite illuminating. In some cases, the school's offerings are quite in alignment. In others, principals have indicated that they've added quite a few courses to their offerings so that they can make sure that they are meeting the needs of the students through the lens of offering courses that they want to take that are supporting where they want to go with that learning.
Just as a follow-up on that, I guess my question would be, is what students are you asking about those courses, right? Like some of these students coming from marginalized communities, it may be 1 or 2 or 3 students in a school that might be saying, I'd like this, but I'm not sure a school would offer that kind of course. Isn't it like, what do majority of students want, so that there can be a full class with a teacher? Like, I'm kind of confused how you're discussing this with marginalized students and then actually giving them the courses that they're asking for, and if they're even willing to come forward about their needs, because sometimes the marginalization is that they feel silent and they don't speak out as well. So like, how are you getting that?
So with the schools that we have piloted this, we've had lots of conversations with the principals and vice principals before they use this. Just sort of blast emailing out the survey to everybody is going to be ineffective in this case. So we talk to them about their plan to engage their students, and we specifically go to which students do we know are not going to fill this survey out, and talk with them. They know their students, they know their school community. What's the best approach that you can take with your students to make sure that those that we know will not respond to this survey do get the chance, do understand that their voice will be heard, and then see that. And that has proven to be quite effective. The feedback I've had from principals is the students feel really good and happy that they were directly reached out to. And in many cases, they see the results of what they have submitted through that survey in the course offerings at school. So it's not perfect, but I think we have a number of things in place to make sure that voices that we may not have traditionally heard are being heard, and that information is being used to change their offerings in schools.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Moving on our first time speakers list, we have Chair Scott, and then we will go to second time speakers list.
Thank you. I would like to pick up on one of the topics that's been raised by multiple people this evening, and that is the issue of this sense of preparedness for post-secondary. Was that a question that we designed, or was that a question that was part of the standard normed survey set?
So that was a question that was in our school climate survey, but that was modeled off of the one that we had used through the learning bar that had been used for previous years. And as I mentioned, we are adapting it this year through the Ministry of Education and the SAP. And they've identified the question as students feeling prepared for, I believe it's the next step in their learning. And that question will be embedded in EQAO in terms of the perceptual questions. And then we'll be using it for students in other grades as well. So we've got comparisons so that it's not just the students taking EQAO this year.
I'm really glad to hear that, because particularly for the students who haven't even started in secondary school yet, their understanding of post-secondary is probably based significantly on what they see on TV, social media, and what their parents are telling them about their post-secondary experience. And so I really have to question whether those students, in responding to the question, have any real concept of what it is they're actually trying to respond to. And for that reason, I think that one of the suggestions that was made previously, that we do need some feedback from students who have been through our system and are out there, maybe just finishing their first year of university or college, or maybe just finishing their first year in the world of work. We do need that feedback from them in terms of how prepared they feel they were, because a large part of the preparation is not just the academic programming that we provide. It is also the character education and the experiential learning and a host of other things that happen in schools. And that is the other challenge, because my concern is that many of our students, given that our society in general right now is more than a little bit risk averse when it comes to student experiences, we have had a tendency to encourage, on the one hand, more independence, particularly in the technology sphere, and on the other hand, greater dependence. And so when you look at those factors coming into it as a societal thing, that I suspect really colors what our students are feeling and makes a difference as to whether or not they do feel prepared for life after high school when they leave our schools. I wonder if staff had any comment on it.
I'll start with a couple of things, and others may have things to add. First, we don't talk about, or we haven't talked about this a lot, but there's some worthwhile data in the study we participated in with the OECD on the development of social and emotional skills. And in fact, it confirms that the relationship between social and emotional skills and occupational expectations are much stronger among 15-year-olds than 10-year-olds. And in all likelihood that that may be because 10-year-olds understand job preferences based on their cognitive capacity at the time. And as that grows, more opportunities grow. And I think that's important because it also gets to the whole concept of preparedness, because of course, what's the difference between a 15-year-old's sense and a 20-year-old sense of interests and capacities, and what would they have taken in the past had they known they wanted to be a dentist, veterinarian, machine shop worker, whatever the pathway is that they choose. So I think just that there's some interesting observations in the OECD study. But the other piece, I think, in terms of the post-secondary analysis of our students, I think we need to understand that the complexity of that as a research project for us is that we don't have all our students going to one place. We don't have access information for them. So, we lose their email, so we don't have an immediate ability to connect with them. And we'd need consent from every student, and we'd need to determine how we'd get the data about their marks, et cetera. So it would be a significant undertaking for the district with a cost, that is beyond what we currently have within our budget. And so we need to decide that work and what we would learn from that would inform our practice. And certainly we can think about some earlier pieces to that. We can think about the exit interviews and some of those things and how that works. But the actual follow-up a few years later would be a much more complex research undertaking for us.
That's perfectly understood. I think there are some simpler things that probably could be done, though. One of the other questions I had, and again, this ties to the previous request, is could we have the data over a period of years?
Would you like to be added back to the second time
Yes,
speakers?
please.
Okay, we're gonna go down the second time speakers list. So we're gonna go trustee Lyra and then Chair Scott.
I have a question about the question that Trustee Scott has asked about modifying that question. Is there any intent to figure out both what their intended pathway is and how prepared they feel? I have concerns that if we don't ask both of those, that you might get a bimodal distribution where the students might say, I feel 9 out of 10 prepared if I'm going for work and only 3 out of 10 prepared if I'm going for college. And the average for that might be 5. And we'd be like, oh, we're halfway, but that's not giving us the full picture. Is there any intent to modify that question in any way?
I'm going to turn it over to the general manager. This is, I believe, an EQAO question.
It's being added to the EQAO perceptual questions on behalf of the ministry. So the question is defined in terms of how the ministry wants it to be asked. And so then that's how it's being added to EQAO. Does that mean that we don't have an opportunity to talk with our students outside of that EQAO perceptual question and get a better understanding for that? Absolutely. I think that happens in a lot of the kinds of avenues that we were talking about already this evening. But as far as the question from the ministry's student achievement plan, the question is set.
Sorry, I thought I had heard that you said that we were intending to ask it of other grades. And if we were intending to ask it of other grades, particularly for 11s and 12s, could we add a clarification piece to that so that we got better data? Is that a thing that we can think about?
Yeah, we can take a look at how we could maybe be adding something as far as changing it at the grade level. If we were adding it to other grades, it would be to our student survey. So it would be consistent across the grades. So I'd need to go back with my team and unpack what that might look like and what the advantages, disadvantages are, as opposed to maybe really targeting some of those groups of students that we know are typically underserved through some of those focus groups and things that are happening to try to get some maybe more in-depth information where we can have deeper conversations, but we can look at that for sure.
Okay.
And if I can jump in, I think that the survey data and the perceptual information that has come forward is what is driving us to go back and then get an understanding of why. So one of the questions I wrote down when Chair Scott was speaking was we need to understand the students' understanding of preparedness. If their belief in preparedness is based on what they're of what being an adult is and is based on what's on social media, it's not going to be quite accurate. And so we do see those pieces. We do currently get some feedback, and the numbers are not great on this. But we do get feedback from some of our graduates about their preparedness, specifically in our department through students who have graduated through our SWAC program. And these were students who all had left us without graduating, and we contacted and worked with them, and they got to graduation and are at a pathway. The feedback we get from them based on their learning experiences is very positive and very powerful. The other piece that we do that we embed into our annual launch event is that we have recent grads come back from various pathways. So we've had students that are now in university, that are in college, that are working, that are very entrepreneurial, which I find fascinating. But they want to get their own businesses started. And we create opportunities for the students to ask them questions about what that experience is as well. That gives us information in terms of how prepared they were moving forward. But it also creates an opportunity for students to speak to people that are very close to their age, having just gone through a very similar experience, and understand what is that experience like. Because oftentimes in learning pathway events, we have representatives from the organizations that are there to describe the school, and they're there with a specific mandate. Having recent grads come and speak to what their experience is like changes things and gives the students a better idea of where they're heading and what they would need. It would need to be prepared for that.
Okay, thank you. So one of the questions that I sort of perennially have is that we have a responsibility for students in care, and I'm specifically carceral care is the angle I'm going with this. Has this program been attempted for those in carceral care, and if it has it been successful?
Short answer, yes. We have connections. I have a meeting with one of the education leads with the CAS, 3 of the education leads with the CAS next week. We meet with them regularly and communicate with them. That really ramped up during COVID when kids were distanced, and we were afraid that we were going to lose them. To be honest, we wanted to keep them. So we work very closely with them. The ASLE is a fundamental piece that we use with the students because we want to make sure that their experiences are counted and valued so that we can boost their confidence as they work to transition back into our learning institution.
Sorry, ASLE?
So that's the authentic student learning experience framework that we've developed.
Okay. Sorry, my laptop has turned itself off. I believe one further question. Yes. So what is the feedback we have gotten from our frontline staff who are utilizing this program?
I am going to turn this over to System Principal Coleman for that.
Thank you for that. Fundamentally, we're seeing a change of practice. We're seeing a change of practice in our educators who are looking and hearing student voice and having students be the center of their learning. We are taking the educator from being the one that's the expert in the learning and having the students tell us what they need, show us what they need, what they want to learn, and show us that we can demonstrate learning differently. It doesn't have to be, as you said earlier, pen to paper. That can be a very compliant task, right? But if you can show that there is a cross-curricular piece, if you can show that there is a transferal of information and transferal of learning that is relevant, that the students can then see themselves in their learning that goes beyond the classroom, that's what we're seeing. When you talk about the power that that can have on a student, but by translation then into an educator, it has changed our lens. It's changed what we're offering. It's changing how we're choosing texts. We're not choosing texts as often as the educators. We're allowing our students to say what they want to learn and letting that drive it. So it is really privileging the voice and the learning needs of our students. And we're starting to learn to take a step back. And not that we're not teaching and not that we're not being facilitators, but we are facilitators actually. And that's the most important piece that we can take away, that we are elbow to elbow and side by side with the learners and not leading it. We're walking the journey with them.
So, sorry, have we tied this in? Because what you've talked about sounds very similar to one of the pillars of alternative education. And I'm wondering, has this been inspired by or tied to our alternative education program, or?
Great question. Yes, in a lot of ways it is tied to that, but the alternative education means that we've pushed students out, right? They haven't found a place within our school community, in their home community, where they want to be. Not always, many times, sometimes it is a chosen piece, but sometimes students have come back to us and said that they did not feel like they had a place in a traditional community school, so that they were choosing an alternative way, or were, as we talked about it earlier, those are intervention pieces when things haven't gone well,
I believe
right?
you're confusing the alternate program with the alternative program. The alternative program is the elementary program.
Got you. Yes, I did confuse that piece, so I will pass on that one to see if you want to add to that.
I think where there's alignment to our secondary, and I mix up the terms all the time, our secondary alternate program is the flexibility in personalizing the learning for the student and allowing the speed and the pace of the learning to be set by the student in that way. So I think that's where we would see that that alignment there. And to extend on to what Assistant Principal Coleman was saying in terms of how staff across the district are embracing this. We get calls all the time to say, we have a student we think that this might be really helpful for, or we're doing some learning. Could you come to our staff meeting and talk to the staff about this? Or could we understand this more? And we are getting more and more of those requests as time goes. So we are seeing a greater uptake of this, and certainly more educators wanting to learn about what drives this.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lara, Chair Scott, and then Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. And going back to something that Lily Miller said in terms of 5 years ago, we were seeing some of the same kind of information. What has changed, and will we be here saying what has changed 5 years from now? It would be really helpful if it were possible even to take a couple of the very bare bones most indicators and provide us with a year by year change in those numbers. Because I know that a lot of things shift from one year to the next because the ministry changes things and courses change and students change. But at the same time, if we're looking at that system kind of metric, it could be very helpful for us to have the year-over-year data, even though there may be some cautions as to its use. Thank you.
I think if I can jump in there, one of the pieces that we use as our benchmark, well, a number of the pieces that we use as our benchmarks through the year, and Dr. Rahim will jump in if I'm way off base here, but we use report card data, we use EQAO data. Part of the discussion that we are having with principals now is very much looking at what's the evidence of growth and change in between those periods. Report card data and EQAO data is essential. We need that. It is extremely important, but there's a lot of time between those pieces of data. So we're doing intentional work with schools right now to look at how do we know we're heading in the right direction so that we know we're likely going to see improvement in that area well in advance, so that if we don't see those indicators, we can intervene and adjust our plans moving forward. So we're trying to identify whether or not things are improving and making changes faster than we may have in the past.
And the piece that I'll add is that these student learning updates, although this year we've broken them into 3 separate reports so that we could have more focused and meaningful conversations, historically it has been 1 report a year as the annual student achievement report. And so when we're doing this work, we sit with the annual student achievement report from last year that was brought in May, and then there was a little bit of shuffling during the pandemic, but then the one prior to that based on the school year 2018-19, and we look at those reports in conjunction with each other as they build on each other. And so when we line them up, we can map out the 10 years of data and what those numbers and trends look like. We don't attach them here intentionally because we didn't want to give you the appendices of 200 pages as we bring in all of the data, but we can look at those reports as they build on each other year over year and continue to add to the numbers. And so although we report the change compared to the last year or the last 2 years, the next set would have been in the previous report.
A 1-pager on graduation rates change over the period would be just a nice thing to have. We don't need 200 pages, but a 1-pager would be a start. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. Trustee Kaplan-Murth, before we go to you, we do have a first-time speaker in the room, so I'm going to go to Stephanie, and then we're going to go to you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Okay, thank you.
It's been a while since I've been here in person. Through you, Chair, I guess, I'm not sure, it's a comment and a question, I guess. And so absolutely educators, and I can only speak for secondary teachers primarily, you know, have been, you know, at the front line of undertaking this work and, you know, value it and are, as has been alluded to, are working on shifting their practice and approach. It does take time. It takes training and resources as well. And it's unfortunate that our provincial government doesn't provide greater resources for school boards to provide more opportunities for training and staffing and the supports to improve our ability to help students be successful. And so I guess one of my questions would be, you had mentioned that moving more into mainstream, and certainly as an alternate teacher, that's where my home is. This kind of ASLE, that kind of individualized programming is far easier to adapt to. And so I do know that there are challenges, and Jen and I have, or System Principal Coleman and I have had conversations about the challenges of trying to adapt this kind of instructional model to mainstream classrooms. Certainly our student success teachers have been engaged with it, but certainly I know it would be challenging for a mainstream classroom teacher to do that. And so what kinds of resources, supports, training will be available for teachers who, it sounds like it's starting, who might want to be engaged in this work?
I'll pass it to System Principal Coleman in a second if she has anything to add to it. But I think because you're right, you can't take the ASLE and apply it directly in a classroom. That's not going to work. But the spirit behind it and the philosophy behind it can happen. So where we're seeing uptake is teachers who contact us to say, can we talk to you about how to do that? We're supporting them through our experiential learning lead. As well as Assistant Principal Coleman. She gets pulled into a lot of different discussions to take a look at how are we embedding learning, embedding student voice, and embedding a pathway choice in that area. So for example, when you saw on the video, the student from Korean, she made that connection in the class. The teacher was very open to supporting that connection. And as I recall correctly, because that video is longer than the clip we gave you, much of the class actually then also thought that would be really interesting to explore, and so jumped on board. So it's not 30 students in a class each doing individual pieces, but that they are working collaboratively. And we see that a lot through our experiential learning work as they engage in cross-grade sometimes and cross-curricular experiences. And we provide them with support to build those experiences. But at the moment, because we're still in pilot phase, we very much go with teachers who have expressed an interest, often reach out to us and wish to explore this learning. Yeah.
And I would add that really our student success teachers are building capacity within their own sites. So, you know, we have one student success teacher that are meeting the needs of many, and we're looking more towards a push and support. Our student success teachers are pushing into classrooms, working with our students who are struggling, finding evidence of learning that's happening in different areas that can be applied to other courses, and then facilitating those conversations on how we can bring learning in one area into a different curriculum area. So it really is started with that as a student success teacher focus, but that capacity building is coming from them as well. So that's certainly been a focus this year.
And one more thing through you, Madam Chair. We are seeing lots of examples of creativity with teaching staff and other staff across our schools. For example, a geography teacher and a science teacher working together on common assessments. There's lots of science in geography and vice versa. There's lots of math and vice versa. So it's that idea, that mindset of the ASLE, and really creating the community and providing or setting those conditions and permission that if you see it in one class, then that's valuable for other classes as well.
Turn it off. Yes, and so I guess I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that just to reinforce that I think are really important, that leading with the teachers who are expressing interest and saying, I think I'm ready, I want to try to do this, and creating the space and the capacity, which also means time, because this is It's qualitative as opposed to quantitative, and it's incredibly enriching and powerful when I've seen it happen. But it does take more time, and it's a different mindset. So educators do need that time and space to be able to collaborate and plan.
All right, thank you. We'll continue down our second time speakers list. So Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I'll try to ask these two questions separately this time. Actually, following on from the comments that we just heard, I wanted to reflect on System Principal Coleman's comment that, you know, educators going elbow in elbow down the path with students. That's great, but we know that our classrooms are too large and we don't have enough EAs. And so I guess the extension of that is as inspirational and wonderful as the pathways sound, in reality, how many students really are getting that the benefit of those supports. I guess as a physician, I think about the patients who just never show up at school. Like, we know that there's still a lot of students who fall through the cracks. So I'm wondering how we are going to show that we can do this with insufficient resources to really turn things around for the students who are most marginalized or most at risk. So that's my first question, I guess, is what resources would it take to be able to do that? And then I have a part 2 question.
That's a very large question. And I guess it goes to, we will always have finite resources. There will always be a certain parameters that we are working within, and we do work within those parameters. So when we look at a lot of the work we've done with the ASLE, with the various pathway programs that we've shared with you this evening, we intentionally went to the students who had been most underserved, who needed the support the most. And made sure to action that. If I'm actually to springboard off of something that Stephanie shared, time and space. Our success in this area has been because we have, and it's a good reminder to keep it, taken the time and space to move this through in a way that allows educators to percolate on and understand the philosophy and start to take a look at what they can do in their classrooms and start to pilot some initial changes. Radical change does not stick. It becomes an event, and then what was tends to reinforce. So our approach has very much been to take time. The ASLE is an example. We started in April of 2020, and we were cautious and intentional with how we extended that, who we worked with. As teachers became more comfortable with it, we extended that. And that approach has allowed us to really embed that in practice, certainly in student success programs, where we're seeing that thinking, that philosophy embed within schools and within classrooms. But we've also seen examples where if districts move too fast, it collapsed. And then we actually take a step backwards. And so we are being cautious and intentional in the approach as we move forward, and doing so within the resources that we have. And in saying that, I'm very proud of the depth that a number of these programs and this thinking is being embedded in schools, because we don't get asked, why would we do this now? We get asked, how could we do this? And what would this look like? And I think being able to realize it is showing us that educator mindset is shifting as we try to meet the needs of especially students whose needs haven't been yet met.
That's fabulous. So actually that raises one more question. I have 2 more questions quickly in terms of where the educators are being educated in terms of Teachers College. Are new teachers coming in with these kinds of ideas, or is this and I guess also similarly, are other districts maybe comparable districts, I don't know, but if there are, but are other districts doing something similar? But are the teachers who are coming in learning to teach this way, where they're being asked to teach in a very different way from traditional pedagogy?
A couple of answers there, some. And so when we have, we welcome a lot of student teachers, teacher candidates to work with our educators. And so they are seeing more innovative ways of doing that. Is this taught at the universities? I don't know. I can't speak to that. I can say that I've been invited to Ottawa U on a number of occasions to speak to teaching candidates about different things that we're doing in our district. To look at learning in different ways and explore some innovative practices that way. And there was one more part to your question, and I'm forgetting it.
Oh, I was asking about other districts.
Oh, other districts? I'm not aware of any other district that is doing what we're doing right now.
And last question very quickly is just to go back to my original questions in terms of disproportionate number of students struggling who are racialized or have special needs or low socioeconomic status in English versus French streams. Why haven't we considered doing what the Catholic School Board has done and introducing French immersion in grade 4 so that we give all kids for the first, for more years of their early education opportunities to thrive and then to have more of a true choice, a more informed choice about whether or not they choose French immersion or English?
So the board has a policy on elementary program structures, and that policy provides that students attend school in their community school, and that schools may have different geographic boundaries based on program. And the policy goes on to establish the programs that we offer. So that's in fact one of the major pieces that was identified in the strat plan for review, right? Program access and quality. And that will be a starting point in our conversation when we look at program access and quality and in our upcoming retreat, where we'll take a look at what is the program offering starting at the elementary level, and does it currently meet our needs, and what is involved in rethinking that, and do we want to rethink it, and what kinds of decisions does that entail, what kind of consultation would that involve, et cetera. So that's the framework.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you. Continuing down, we're going to our third time speakers list. Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. I'll speak quicker next time. So my first question is, Ottawa is a very disperse geographic city. What kind of geographic diversity has this program seen? Are we seeing uptake in all of our schools? Are we seeing uptake in only some of our schools? And is that uptake evenly distributed?
We have seen uptake in all of our schools. I wouldn't say it's evenly distributed. And I'm thinking back over the last 4 years, we had some schools engage with it faster than others, but each of them did engage over a period of time such that we are able to offer this in all of our schools right now.
That was the right answer, because there are some schools where there's going to be more need than others. My last question is about margins of error and decimals in all the percentages that we see. I'm wondering if we can start including n values, margins of error, look at any kind of statistical analysis, so that it's not just, oh, we're down 1% this year or up 1% next year. It's, if we're still within the whatever the margin of error is, then that's not really a change, but it might look like a change. And is there any way that we can do any of the statistics to make sure that we're not misinterpreting trends that are actually just noise?
So we do try to include the ends either in the first column or in the headings. The reason that we don't see standard errors is because we're not making inferences about a population. This is our full population data. So in these cases, even one student is something that we want to be highlighting in this report because it's a change for that particular student.
My understanding is that not all of this is 100% of our student population. We're going to get a third of our student population will have filled it out, or 40% of our student population will have filled it out. And so we are then making an inference on the other 60% based on the 40% who filled it out. And so there is some amount of extrapolation based on the data that we have to our full student population. And I'm wondering if we can sort of highlight that and make any kind of statistical inferences about the noise inherent in the data. Does that make sense?
It does. I would say that that's something that we would want to do with caution because we recognize that there is participation bias. And for us to make inferences that the students filling out the survey are necessarily representative of the entire student population is something that I would want to caution against doing. So I would say our biggest goal is to really work toward increased participation rate so that we do have fuller data sets, so that when we are looking and making conclusions, observations about the data that we have, that it's more representative of our full student population.
So I appreciate that there's going to be a sample bias on who fills it out. I appreciate that we're not going to get perfect data, but also because we are doing some amount of assuming that the data that we have is 100% of the population, or we're extrapolating it out to 100% of the population, it feels disingenuous not to highlight that in a way. And I'm wondering, I'm not an expert in statistics. I don't know if you're an expert in statistics, but if we can look at ways to make sure that the noise inherent in the data is represented. I'd love to hear ways, we can talk about this later. I think the other 15 people don't want to hear about math, but I'd like to see that represented in the data that we're presenting to the public. Thank you.
All right, looking around the room, I am seeing no other hands. So thank you very much for this thorough report. It is phenomenal to see all the hard work and the excellent metrics. So congratulations to everyone for their work on this report. All right, moving along, we are going to move to item 11, information items. I now call upon Chair Scott or Trustee Jenkins to provide an OPSPO report if available.
There's no update this evening.
All right, thank you. Moving along to item 11.2, do we have an update coming from OSTA this evening? I am going to look to Trustee Lyra in Trustee Lee's absence.
The OSTA meeting in January did not happen, and so there is no OSTA update this evening.
All right, thank you. Trustee Blackburn, is your hand up as a question item for the OPSPO report?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I put it up too quick.
Okay. Moving on to item 12, new business. Is there any new business, Trustee Blackburn?
Sorry about that, Madam Chair. I'd just like to give notice of motion that I will be submitting a motion regarding the chair writing a letter to the Minister of Education regarding ensuring the minister provides school boards with funds to continue the menstrual product program. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Looking around the room, is there any other new business? Trustee Lyra?
I'm giving notice of motion that I'm intending to ask the chair to write a letter supporting other school boards' initiatives around banning the advertising of gambling.
All right, thank you, Trustee Lyra. Looking around, I am seeing no other new business. I now declare this meeting adjourned.